Chapter 11. Lord Grenville's Ball. The historic ball given by the then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Lord Grenville, was the most brilliant function of the year. Though the autumn season had only just begun, everybody who was anybody had contrived to be in London in time to be present there, and to shine at this ball, to the best of his or her respective ability. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales had promised to be present. He was coming on presently from the opera. Lord Grenville himself had listened to the 2 first acts of Orpheus, before preparing to receive his guests. At 10 o'clock, an unusually late hour in those days, the grand rooms of the Foreign Office, exquisitely decorated with exotic palms and flowers, were filled to overflowing. One room had been set apart for dancing, and the dainty strains of the minuet made a soft accompaniment to the gay chatter, the merry laughter of the numerous and brilliant company. In a smaller chamber, facing the top of the fine stairway, the distinguished host stood ready to receive his guests. Distinguished men, beautiful women, notabilities from every European country had already filed past him, had exchanged the elaborate bows and curtsies with him, which the extravagant fashion of the time demanded, and then, laughing and talking, had dispersed in the ball, reception, and card rooms beyond. Not far from Lord Grenville's elbow, leaning against one of the console tables, Chauvelin, in his irreproachable black costume, was taking a quiet survey of the brilliant throng. He noted that Sir Percy and Lady Blakeney had not yet arrived, and his keen, pale eyes glanced quickly towards the door every time a newcomer appeared. He stood somewhat isolated. The envoy of the revolutionary government of France was not likely to be very popular in England, at a time when the news of the awful September massacres, and of the reign of terror and anarchy, had just begun to filtrate across the Channel. In his official capacity he had been received courteously by his English colleagues. Mr. Pitt had shaken him by the hand. Lord Grenville had entertained him more than once, but the more intimate circles of London society ignored him altogether. The women openly turned their backs upon him. The men who held no official position refused to shake his hand. But Chauvelin was not the man to trouble himself about these social amenities, which he called mere incidents in his diplomatic career. He was blindly enthusiastic for the revolutionary cause, he despised all social inequalities, and he had a burning love for his own country. These 3 sentiments made him supremely indifferent to the snubs he received in this fog-ridden, loyalist, old-fashioned England. But, above all, Chauvelin had a purpose at heart. He firmly believed that the French aristocrat was the most bitter enemy of France. He would have wished to see every one of them annihilated. He was one of those who, during this awful reign of terror, had been the first to utter the historic and ferocious desire that aristocrats might have but one head between them, so that it might be cut off with a single stroke of the guillotine. And thus he looked upon every French aristocrat, who had succeeded in escaping from France, as so much prey of which the guillotine had been unwarrantably cheated. There is no doubt that those royalist émigrés, once they had managed to cross the frontier, did their very best to stir up foreign indignation against France. Plots without end were hatched in England, in Belgium, in Holland, to try and induce some great power to send troops into revolutionary Paris, to free King Louis, and to summarily hang the bloodthirsty leaders of that monster republic. Small wonder, therefore, that the romantic and mysterious personality of the Scarlet Pimpernel was a source of bitter hatred to Chauvelin. He and the few young jackanapes under his command, well furnished with money, armed with boundless daring and acute cunning, had succeeded in rescuing hundreds of aristocrats from France. 9/10 of the émigrés who were fêted at the English court owed their safety to that man and to his league. Chauvelin had sworn to his colleagues in Paris that he would discover the identity of that meddlesome Englishman, entice him over to France, and then. Chauvelin drew a deep breath of satisfaction at the very thought of seeing that enigmatic head falling under the knife of the guillotine, as easily as that of any other man. Suddenly there was a great stir on the handsome staircase. All conversation stopped for a moment as the majordomo's voice outside announced, "His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and suite, Sir Percy Blakeney, Lady Blakeney." Lord Grenville went quickly to the door to receive his exalted guest. The Prince of Wales, dressed in a magnificent court suit of salmon-colored velvet richly embroidered with gold, entered with Marguerite Blakeney on his arm, and on his left Sir Percy, in gorgeous shimmering cream satin, cut in the extravagant, incroyable style, his fair hair free from powder, priceless lace at his neck and wrists, and the flat chapeau bras under his arm. After the few conventional words of deferential greeting, Lord Grenville said to his royal guest, "Will your Highness permit me to introduce M. Chauvelin, the accredited agent of the French government?" Chauvelin, immediately the prince entered, had stepped forward, expecting this introduction. He bowed very low, whilst the prince returned his salute with a curt nod of the head. "Monsieur," said his Royal Highness coldly, "we will try to forget the government that sent you, and look upon you merely as our guest, a private gentleman from France. As such you are welcome, monsieur." "Monseigneur," rejoined Chauvelin, bowing once again. "Madame," he added, bowing ceremoniously before Marguerite. "Ah, my little Chauvelin," she said with unconcerned gaiety, and extending her tiny hand to him. "Monsieur and I are old friends, your Royal Highness." "Ah then," said the prince, this time very graciously, "you are doubly welcome, monsieur." "There is someone else I would crave permission to present to your Royal Highness," here interposed Lord Grenville. "Ah, who is it?" asked the prince. "Madame la Comtesse de Tournay de Basserive and her family, who have but recently come from France." "By all means, they are among the lucky ones then." Lord Grenville turned in search of the Comtesse, who sat at the further end of the room. "Lud love me," whispered his Royal Highness to Marguerite as soon as he had caught sight of the rigid figure of the old lady. "Lud love me. She looks very virtuous and very melancholy." "Faith, your Royal Highness," she rejoined with a smile, "virtue is like precious odors, most fragrant when it is crushed." "Virtue, alas," sighed the prince, "is mostly unbecoming to your charming sex, madame." "Madame la Comtesse de Tournay de Basserive," said Lord Grenville, introducing the lady. "This is a pleasure, madame. My royal father, as you know, is ever glad to welcome those of your compatriots whom France has driven from her shores." "Your Royal Highness is ever gracious," replied the Comtesse with becoming dignity. Then, indicating her daughter, who stood timidly by her side, "My daughter Suzanne, monseigneur," she said. "Ah, charming, charming," said the prince. "And now allow me, Comtesse, to introduce to you Lady Blakeney, who honors us with her friendship. You and she will have much to say to one another, I vow. Every compatriot of Lady Blakeney's is doubly welcome for her sake. Her friends are our friends, her enemies the enemies of England." Marguerite's blue eyes had twinkled with merriment at this gracious speech from her exalted friend. The Comtesse de Tournay, who lately had so flagrantly insulted her, was here receiving a public lesson, at which Marguerite could not help but rejoice. But the Comtesse, for whom respect of royalty amounted almost to a religion, was too well schooled in courtly etiquette to show the slightest sign of embarrassment, as the two ladies curtsied ceremoniously to one another. "His Royal Highness is ever gracious, madame," said Marguerite demurely, and with a wealth of mischief in her twinkling blue eyes, "but here there is no need for his kind mediation. Your amiable reception of me at our last meeting still dwells pleasantly in my memory." "We poor exiles, madame," rejoined the Comtesse frigidly, "show our gratitude to England by devotion to the wishes of Monseigneur." "Madame," said Marguerite with another ceremonious curtsy. "Madame," responded the Comtesse with equal dignity. The prince in the meanwhile was saying a few gracious words to the young Vicomte. "I am happy to know you, Monsieur le Vicomte," he said. "I knew your father well when he was ambassador in London." "Ah, Monseigneur," replied the Vicomte, "I was a little boy then, and now I owe the honor of this meeting to our protector, the Scarlet Pimpernel." "Hush!" said the prince earnestly and quickly as he indicated Chauvelin, who had stood a little on one side throughout the whole of this little scene, watching Marguerite and the Comtesse with an amused, sarcastic little smile around his thin lips. "Nay, Monseigneur," he said now as if in direct response to the prince's challenge, "pray do not check this gentleman's display of gratitude. The name of that interesting red flower is well known to me, and to France." The prince looked at him keenly for a moment or two. "Faith, then, monsieur," he said, "perhaps you know more about our national hero than we do ourselves. Perchance you know who he is. See," he added, turning to the groups round the room, "the ladies hang upon your lips. You would render yourself popular among the fair sex if you were to gratify their curiosity." "Ah, Monseigneur," said Chauvelin significantly, "rumor has it in France that your Highness could, and you would, give the truest account of that enigmatical wayside flower." He looked quickly and keenly at Marguerite as he spoke, but she betrayed no emotion, and her eyes met his quite fearlessly. "Nay, man," replied the prince, "my lips are sealed, and the members of the League jealously guard the secret of their chief. So his fair adorers have to be content with worshipping a shadow. Here in England, monsieur," he added with wonderful charm and dignity, "we but name the Scarlet Pimpernel, and every fair cheek is suffused with a blush of enthusiasm. None have seen him save his faithful lieutenants. We know not if he be tall or short, fair or dark, handsome or ill-formed, but we know that he is the bravest gentleman in all the world, and we all feel a little proud, monsieur, when we remember that he is an Englishman. Ah, Monsieur Chauvelin," added Marguerite, looking almost with defiance across at the placid, sphinx-like face of the Frenchman. "His Royal Highness should add that we ladies think of him as of a hero of old. We worship him, we wear his badge, we tremble for him when he is in danger and exult with him in the hour of his victory." Chauvelin did no more than bow placidly both to the prince and to Marguerite. He felt that both speeches were intended, each in their way, to convey contempt or defiance. The pleasure-loving, idle prince he despised. The beautiful woman, who in her golden hair wore a spray of small red flowers composed of rubies and diamonds, her he held in the hollow of his hand. He could afford to remain silent and to await events. A long, jovial, inane laugh broke the sudden silence which had fallen over everyone. "And we poor husbands," came in slow, affected accents from gorgeous Sir Percy, "we have to stand by, while they worship a demmed shadow." Everyone laughed, the prince more loudly than anyone. The tension of subdued excitement was relieved, and the next moment everyone was laughing and chatting merrily as the gay crowd broke up and dispersed in the adjoining rooms. Chapter 12. The Scrap of Paper. Marguerite suffered intensely. Though she laughed and chatted, though she was more admired, more surrounded, more fate than any woman there, she felt like one condemned to death, living her last day upon this earth. Her nerves were in a state of painful tension, which had increased 100-fold during that brief hour which she had spent in her husband's company, between the opera and the ball. The short ray of hope, that she might find in this good-natured, lazy individual a valuable friend and adviser, had vanished as quickly as it had come, the moment she found herself alone with him. The same feeling of good-humored contempt which one feels for an animal or a faithful servant, made her turn away with a smile from the man who should have been her moral support in this heart-rending crisis through which she was passing, who should have been her cool-headed adviser, when feminine sympathy and sentiment tossed her hither and thither, between her love for her brother, who was far away and in mortal peril, and horror of the awful service which Chauvelin had exacted from her in exchange for Armand's safety. There he stood, the moral support, the cool-headed adviser, surrounded by a crowd of brainless, empty-headed young fops, who were even now repeating from mouth to mouth, and with every sign of the keenest enjoyment, a doggerel quatrain which he had just given forth. Everywhere the absurd, silly words met her. People seemed to have little else to speak about. Even the prince had asked her, with a laugh, whether she appreciated her husband's latest poetic efforts. "All done in the tying of a cravat," Sir Percy had declared to his clique of admirers. "We seek him here, we seek him there. Those Frenchies seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven? Is he in hell? That demmed, elusive Pimpernel?" Sir Percy's bon mot had gone the round of the brilliant reception rooms. The prince was enchanted. He vowed that life without Blakeney would be but a dreary desert. Then, taking him by the arm, had led him to the card-room, and engaged him in a long game of hazard. Sir Percy, whose chief interest in most social gatherings seemed to center round the card table, usually allowed his wife to flirt, dance, to amuse or bore herself as much as she liked. And tonight, having delivered himself of his bon mot, he had left Marguerite surrounded by a crowd of admirers of all ages, all anxious and willing to help her to forget that somewhere in the spacious reception rooms, there was a long, lazy being who had been fool enough to suppose that the cleverest woman in Europe would settle down to the prosaic bonds of English matrimony. Her still overwrought nerves, her excitement and agitation, lent beautiful Marguerite Blakeney much additional charm. Escorted by a veritable bevy of men of all ages and of most nationalities, she called forth many exclamations of admiration from everyone as she passed. She would not allow herself any more time to think. Her early, somewhat bohemian training had made her something of a fatalist. She felt that events would shape themselves, that the directing of them was not in her hands. From Chauvelin she knew that she could expect no mercy. He had set a price upon Armand's head, and left it to her to pay or not, as she chose. Later on in the evening she caught sight of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes and Lord Antony Dewhurst, who seemingly had just arrived. She noticed at once that Sir Andrew immediately made for little Suzanne de Tournay, and that the two young people soon managed to isolate themselves in one of the deep embrasures of the mullioned windows, there to carry on a long conversation, which seemed very earnest and very pleasant on both sides. Both the young men looked a little haggard and anxious, but otherwise they were irreproachably dressed, and there was not the slightest sign, about their courtly demeanor, of the terrible catastrophe, which they must have felt hovering round them and round their chief. That the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel had no intention of abandoning its cause, she had gathered through little Suzanne herself, who spoke openly of the assurance she and her mother had had that the Comte de Tournay would be rescued from France by the League, within the next few days. Vaguely she began to wonder, as she looked at the brilliant and fashionable crowd in the gaily lighted ballroom, which of these worldly men round her was the mysterious Scarlet Pimpernel, who held the threads of such daring plots, and the fate of valuable lives in his hands. A burning curiosity seized her to know him, although for months she had heard of him and had accepted his anonymity as everyone else in society had done, but now she longed to know, quite impersonally, quite apart from Armand and quite apart from Chauvelin, only for her own sake, for the sake of the enthusiastic admiration she had always bestowed on his bravery and cunning. He was at the ball, of course, somewhere, since Sir Andrew Ffoulkes and Lord Antony Dewhurst were here, evidently expecting to meet their chief, and perhaps to get a fresh mot d'ordre from him. Marguerite looked round at everyone, at the aristocratic high-typed Norman faces, the squarely built, fair-haired Saxon, the more gentle, humorous cast of the Celt, wondering which of these betrayed the power, the energy, the cunning which had imposed its will and its leadership upon a number of high-born English gentlemen, among whom rumor asserted was His Royal Highness himself. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes? Surely not, with his gentle blue eyes, which were looking so tenderly and longingly after little Suzanne, who was being led away from the pleasant tete-a-tete by her stern mother. Marguerite watched him across the room as he finally turned away with a sigh, and seemed to stand aimless and lonely, now that Suzanne's dainty little figure had disappeared in the crowd. She watched him as he strolled towards the doorway, which led to a small boudoir beyond, then paused and leaned against the framework of it, looking still anxiously all round him. Marguerite contrived for the moment to evade her present attentive cavalier, and she skirted the fashionable crowd, drawing nearer to the doorway, against which Sir Andrew was leaning. Why she wished to get closer to him, she could not have said. Perhaps she was impelled by an all-powerful fatality, which so often seems to rule the destinies of men. Suddenly she stopped. Her very heart seemed to stand still, her eyes, large and excited, flashed for a moment towards that doorway, then as quickly were turned away again. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes was still in the same listless position by the door, but Marguerite had distinctly seen that Lord Hastings, a young buck, a friend of her husband's and one of the prince's set, had, as he quickly brushed past him, slipped something into his hand. For one moment longer, it was the merest flash, Marguerite paused. The next she had, with admirably played unconcern, resumed her walk across the room, but this time more quickly towards that doorway when Sir Andrew had now disappeared. All this, from the moment that Marguerite had caught sight of Sir Andrew leaning against the doorway, until she followed him into the little boudoir beyond, had occurred in less than a minute. Fate is usually swift when she deals a blow. Now Lady Blakeney had suddenly ceased to exist. It was Marguerite St. Just who was there only, Marguerite St. Just who had passed her childhood, her early youth, in the protecting arms of her brother Armand. She had forgotten everything else, her rank, her dignity, her secret enthusiasms, everything save that Armand stood in peril of his life, and that there, not 20 feet away from her, in the small boudoir which was quite deserted, in the very hands of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, might be the talisman which would save her brother's life. Barely another 30 seconds had elapsed between the moment when Lord Hastings slipped the mysterious something into Sir Andrew's hand, and the one when she, in her turn, reached the deserted boudoir. Sir Andrew was standing with his back to her and close to a table upon which stood a massive silver candelabra. A slip of paper was in his hand, and he was in the very act of perusing its contents. Unperceived, her soft clinging robe making not the slightest sound upon the heavy carpet, not daring to breathe until she had accomplished her purpose, Marguerite slipped close behind him. At that moment he looked round and saw her. She uttered a groan, passed her hand across her forehead and murmured faintly, "The heat in the room was terrible. I felt so faint." She tottered almost as if she would fall, and Sir Andrew, quickly recovering himself, and crumpling in his hand the tiny note he had been reading, was only, apparently, just in time to support her. "You are ill, Lady Blakeney?" he asked with much concern. "Let me—" No, nothing," she interrupted quickly. "A chair, quick." She sank into a chair close to the table and throwing back her head, closed her eyes. "There," she murmured still faintly, "the giddiness is passing off. Do not heed me, Sir Andrew, I assure you I already feel better." At moments like these there is no doubt, and psychologists actually assert it, that there is in us a sense which has absolutely nothing to do with the other 5. It is not that we see, it is not that we hear or touch, yet we seem to do all 3 at once. Marguerite sat there with her eyes apparently closed. Sir Andrew was immediately behind her, and on her right was the table with the 5-armed candelabra upon it. Before her mental vision there was absolutely nothing but Armand's face. Armand, whose life was in the most imminent danger, and who seemed to be looking at her from a background upon which were dimly painted the seething crowd of Paris, the bare walls of the Tribunal of Public Safety, with Fouquier Tinville, the public prosecutor, demanding Armand's life in the name of the people of France, and the lurid guillotine with its stained knife waiting for another victim. Armand. For one moment there was dead silence in the little boudoir. Beyond, from the brilliant ballroom, the sweet notes of the gavotte, the frou-frou of rich dresses, the talk and laughter of a large and merry crowd, came as a strange, weird accompaniment to the drama which was being enacted here. Sir Andrew had not uttered another word. Then it was that extra sense became potent in Marguerite Blakeney. She could not see, for her eyes were closed. She could not hear, for the noise from the ballroom drowned the soft rustle of that momentous scrap of paper. Nevertheless she knew, as if she had both seen and heard, that Sir Andrew was even now holding the paper to the flame of one of the candles. At the exact moment that it began to catch fire, she opened her eyes, raised her hand and, with two dainty fingers, had taken the burning scrap of paper from the young man's hand. Then she blew out the flame and held the paper to her nostril with perfect unconcern. "How thoughtful of you, Sir Andrew," she said gaily. "Surely, 'twas your grandmother who taught you that the smell of burnt paper was a sovereign remedy against giddiness." She sighed with satisfaction, holding the paper tightly between her jeweled fingers, that talisman which perhaps would save her brother Armand's life. Sir Andrew was staring at her, too dazed for the moment to realize what had actually happened. He had been taken so completely by surprise that he seemed quite unable to grasp the fact that the slip of paper, which she held in her dainty hand, was one perhaps on which the life of his comrade might depend. Marguerite burst into a long, merry peal of laughter. "Why do you stare at me like that?" she said playfully. "I assure you I feel much better. Your remedy has proved most effectual. This room is most delightfully cool," she added with the same perfect composure, "and the sound of the gavotte from the ballroom is fascinating and soothing." She was prattling on in the most unconcerned and pleasant way, whilst Sir Andrew, in an agony of mind, was racking his brains as to the quickest method he could employ to get that bit of paper out of that beautiful woman's hand. Instinctively vague and tumultuous thoughts rushed through his mind. He suddenly remembered her nationality, and worst of all recollected that horrible tale anent the Marquis de St. Cyr, which in England no one had credited, for the sake of Sir Percy as well as for her own. "What? Still dreaming and staring?" she said with a merry laugh. "You are most ungallant, Sir Andrew, and now I come to think of it, you seemed more startled than pleased when you saw me just now. I do believe, after all, that it was not concern for my health, nor yet a remedy taught you by your grandmother that caused you to burn this tiny scrap of paper. I vow it must have been your lady love's last cruel epistle you were trying to destroy. Now confess," she added, playfully holding up the scrap of paper, "does this contain her final congé or a last appeal to kiss and make friends?" "Whichever it is, Lady Blakeney," said Sir Andrew, who was gradually recovering his self-possession, "this little note is undoubtedly mine, and—" Not caring whether his action was one that would be styled ill-bred towards a lady, the young man had made a bold dash for the note, but Marguerite's thoughts flew quicker than his own. Her actions, under pressure of this intense excitement, were swifter and more sure. She was tall and strong. She took a quick step backwards and knocked over the small Sheraton table which was already top-heavy, and which fell down with a crash, together with the massive candelabra upon it. She gave a quick cry of alarm. "The candles, Sir Andrew, quick!" There was not much damage done. One or two of the candles had blown out as the candelabra fell. Others had merely sent some grease upon the valuable carpet. One had ignited the paper shade over it. Sir Andrew quickly and dexterously put out the flames and replaced the candelabra upon the table. But this had taken him a few seconds to do, and those seconds had been all that Marguerite needed to cast a quick glance at the paper, and to note its contents, a dozen words in the same distorted handwriting she had seen before, and bearing the same device, a star-shaped flower drawn in red ink. When Sir Andrew once more looked at her, he only saw on her face alarm at the untoward accident and relief at its happy issue, whilst the tiny and momentous note had apparently fluttered to the ground. Eagerly the young man picked it up, and his face looked much relieved as his fingers closed tightly over it. "For shame, Sir Andrew," she said, shaking her head with a playful sigh, "making havoc in the heart of some impressionable duchess, whilst conquering the affections of my sweet little Suzanne. Well. I do believe it was Cupid himself who stood by you and threatened the entire Foreign Office with destruction by fire, just on purpose to make me drop love's message, before it had been polluted by my indiscreet eyes. To think that, a moment longer and I might have known the secrets of an erring duchess." "You will forgive me, Lady Blakeney," said Sir Andrew, now as calm as she was herself, "if I resumed the interesting occupation which you had interrupted?" "By all means, Sir Andrew. How should I venture to thwart the love god again? Perhaps he would mete out some terrible chastisement against my presumption. Burn your love token by all means." Sir Andrew had already twisted the paper into a long spill, and was once again holding it to the flame of the candle, which had remained alight. He did not notice the strange smile on the face of his fair vis-a-vis, so intent was he on the work of destruction. Perhaps, had he done so, the look of relief would have faded from his face. He watched the fateful note as it curled under the flame. Soon the last fragment fell on the floor and he placed his heel upon the ashes. "And now, Sir Andrew," said Marguerite Blakeney, with the pretty nonchalance peculiar to herself, and with the most winning of smiles, "will you venture to excite the jealousy of your fair lady by asking me to dance the minuet?" Chapter 13. Thither, or? The few words which Marguerite Blakeney had managed to read on the half-scorched piece of paper seemed literally to be the words of fate. "Start myself tomorrow?" This she had read quite distinctly. Then came a blur caused by the smoke of the candle, which obliterated the next few words. But right at the bottom, there was another sentence, which was now standing clearly and distinctly, like letters of fire, before her mental vision. "If you wish to speak to me again, I shall be in the supper room at 1 o'clock precisely." The whole was signed with the hastily scrawled little device, a tiny star-shaped flower, which had become so familiar to her. 1 o'clock precisely. It was now close upon 11. The last minuet was being danced, with Sir Andrew Ffoulkes and beautiful Lady Blakeney leading the couples, through its delicate and intricate figures. Close upon 11. The hands of the handsome Louis XV. Clock upon its ormolu bracket seemed to move along with maddening rapidity. 2 hours more, and her fate and that of Armand would be sealed. In 2 hours she must make up her mind whether she will keep the knowledge so cunningly gained to herself, and leave her brother to his fate, or whether she will willfully betray a brave man, whose life was devoted to his fellow men, who was noble, generous, and above all, unsuspecting. It seemed a horrible thing to do. But then there was Armand. Armand, too, was noble and brave. Armand, too, was unsuspecting. And Armand loved her, would have willingly trusted his life in her hands, and now, when she could save him from death, she hesitated. It was monstrous. Her brother's kind, gentle face, so full of love for her, seemed to be looking reproachfully at her. "You might have saved me, Margot," he seemed to say to her, "and you chose the life of a stranger, a man you do not know, whom you have never seen, and preferred that he should be safe, whilst you sent me to the guillotine." All these conflicting thoughts raged through Marguerite's brain, while, with a smile upon her lips, she glided through the graceful mazes of the minuet. She noted, with that acute sense of hers, that she had succeeded in completely allaying Sir Andrew's fears. Her self-control had been absolutely perfect. She was a finer actress at this moment, and throughout the whole of this minuet, than she had ever been upon the boards of the Comédie Française. But then, a beloved brother's life had not depended upon her histrionic powers. She was too clever to overdo her part, and made no further allusions to the supposed billet doux, which had caused Sir Andrew Ffoulkes such an agonizing 5 minutes. She watched his anxiety melting away under her sunny smile, and soon perceived that, whatever doubt may have crossed his mind at the moment, she had, by the time the last bars of the minuet had been played, succeeded in completely dispelling it. He never realized in what a fever of excitement she was, what effort it cost her to keep up a constant ripple of banal conversation. When the minuet was over, she asked Sir Andrew to take her into the next room. "I have promised to go down to supper with His Royal Highness," she said, "but before we part, tell me, am I forgiven?" "Forgiven?" "Yes. Confess I gave you a fright just now. But remember, I am not an Englishwoman, and I do not look upon the exchanging of billet doux as a crime, and I vow I'll not tell my little Suzanne. But now tell me, shall I welcome you at my water party on Wednesday?" "I am not sure, Lady Blakeney," he replied evasively. "I may have to leave London tomorrow." "I would not do that if I were you," she said earnestly. Then seeing the anxious look once more reappearing in his eyes, she added gaily, "No one can throw a ball better than you can, Sir Andrew. We should so miss you on the bowling green." He had led her across the room to one beyond, where already His Royal Highness was waiting for the beautiful Lady Blakeney. "Madam, supper awaits us," said the prince, offering his arm to Marguerite, "and I am full of hope. The goddess Fortune has frowned so persistently on me at hazard, that I look with confidence for the smiles of the goddess of beauty." "Your Highness has been unfortunate at the card tables?" asked Marguerite as she took the prince's arm. "Most unfortunate. Blakeney, not content with being the richest among my father's subjects, has also the most outrageous luck. By the way, where is that inimitable wit? I vow, madam, that this life would be but a dreary desert without your smiles and his sallies. Chapter 14. 1 o'clock precisely. Supper had been extremely gay. All those present declared that never had Lady Blakeney been more adorable, nor that demmed idiot Sir Percy more amusing. His Royal Highness had laughed until the tears streamed down his cheeks at Blakeney's foolish yet funny repartees. His doggerel verse, "We seek him here, we seek him there," etc., was sung to the tune of "Ho, Merry Britons," and to the accompaniment of glasses knocked loudly against the table. Lord Grenville, moreover, had a most perfect cook. Some wags asserted that he was a scion of the old French noblesse, who, having lost his fortune, had come to seek it in the cuisine of the Foreign Office. Marguerite Blakeney was in her most brilliant mood, and surely not a soul in that crowded supper-room had even an inkling of the terrible struggle which was raging within her heart. The clock was ticking so mercilessly on. It was long past midnight, and even the Prince of Wales was thinking of leaving the supper table. Within the next half-hour the destinies of two brave men would be pitted against one another, the dearly beloved brother and he, the unknown hero. Marguerite had not even tried to see Chauvelin during this last hour. She knew that his keen fox-like eyes would terrify her at once, and incline the balance of her decision towards Armand. While she did not see him, there still lingered in her heart of hearts a vague, undefined hope that something would occur, something big, enormous, epic-making, which would shift from her young, weak shoulders this terrible burden of responsibility, of having to choose between two such cruel alternatives. But the minutes ticked on with that dull monotony which they invariably seem to assume when our very nerves ache with their incessant ticking. After supper, dancing was resumed. His Royal Highness had left, and there was general talk of departing among the older guests. The young ones were indefatigable and had started on a new gavotte, which would fill the next quarter of an hour. Marguerite did not feel equal to another dance. There is a limit to the most enduring self-control. Escorted by a cabinet minister, she had once more found her way to the tiny boudoir, still the most deserted among all the rooms. She knew that Chauvelin must be lying in wait for her somewhere, ready to seize the first possible opportunity for a tête-à-tête. His eyes had met hers for a moment after the four-supper minuet, and she knew that the keen diplomatist, with those searching pale eyes of his, had divined that her work was accomplished. Fate had willed it so. Marguerite, torn by the most terrible conflict heart of woman can ever know, had resigned herself to its decrees. But Armand must be saved at any cost. He first of all, for he was her brother, had been mother, father, friend to her ever since she, a tiny babe, had lost both her parents. To think of Armand dying a traitor's death on the guillotine was too horrible even to dwell upon. Impossible, in fact. That could never be, never. As for the stranger, the hero, well, there let fate decide. Marguerite would redeem her brother's life at the hands of the relentless enemy, then let that cunning Scarlet Pimpernel extricate himself after that. Perhaps, vaguely, Marguerite hoped that the daring plotter, who for so many months had baffled an army of spies, would still manage to evade Chauvelin and remain immune to the end. She thought of all this as she sat listening to the witty discourse of the cabinet minister, who, no doubt, felt that he had found in Lady Blakeney a most perfect listener. Suddenly she saw the keen fox-like face of Chauvelin peeping through the curtained doorway. "Lord Fancourt," she said to the minister, "will you do me a service?" "I am entirely at your ladyship's service," he replied gallantly. "Will you see if my husband is still in the card-room? And if he is, will you tell him that I am very tired, and would be glad to go home soon? The commands of a beautiful woman are binding on all mankind, even on cabinet ministers." Lord Fancourt prepared to obey instantly. "I do not like to leave your ladyship alone," he said. "Never fear. I shall be quite safe here, and, I think, undisturbed. But I am really tired. You know Sir Percy will drive back to Richmond. It is a long way and we shall not, and we do not hurry, get home before daybreak." Lord Fancourt had perforce to go. The moment he had disappeared, Chauvelin slipped into the room, and the next instant stood calm and impassive by her side. "You have news for me?" he said. An icy mantle seemed to have suddenly settled round Marguerite's shoulders. Though her cheeks glowed with fire, she felt chilled and numbed. "Oh, Armand, will you ever know the terrible sacrifice of pride, of dignity, of womanliness a devoted sister is making for your sake?" "Nothing of importance," she said, staring mechanically before her, "but it might prove a clue. I contrived, no matter how, to detect Sir Andrew Ffoulkes in the very act of burning a paper at one of these candles, in this very room. That paper I succeeded in holding between my fingers for the space of 2 minutes, and to cast my eye on it for that of 10 seconds. Time enough to learn its contents? Asked Chauvelin quietly. She nodded. Then she continued in the same even, mechanical tone of voice. In the corner of the paper there was the usual rough device of a small star-shaped flower. Above it I read 2 lines, everything else was scorched and blackened by the flame. And what were these 2 lines? Her throat seemed suddenly to have contracted. For an instant she felt that she could not speak the words, which might send a brave man to his death. It is lucky that the whole paper was not burned, added Chauvelin with dry sarcasm, for it might have fared ill with Armand St. Just, what were the 2 lines, citoyen? One was, I start myself tomorrow, she said quietly. The other, if you wish to speak to me, I shall be in the supper room at 1 o'clock precisely. Chauvelin looked up at the clock just above the mantelpiece. Then I have plenty of time, he said placidly. What are you going to do? She asked. She was pale as a statue, her hands were icy cold, her head and heart throbbed with the awful strain upon her nerves. Oh, this was cruel. Cruel. What had she done to have deserved all this? Her choice was made. Had she done a vile action or one that was sublime? The recording angel who writes in the book of gold alone could give an answer. What are you going to do? She repeated mechanically. Oh, nothing for the present. After that it will depend. On what? On whom I shall see in the supper room at 1 o'clock precisely. You will see the Scarlet Pimpernel, of course. But you do not know him. No. But I shall presently. Sir Andrew will have warned him. I think not. When you parted from him after the minuet he stood and watched you for a moment or 2, with a look which gave me to understand that something had happened between you. It was only natural, was it not? That I should make a shrewd guess as to the nature of that something. I thereupon engaged the young gallant in a long and animated conversation. We discussed Herr Gluck's singular success in London, until a lady claimed his arm for supper. Since then, I did not lose sight of him through supper. When we all came upstairs again, Lady Portarles buttonholed him and started on the subject of pretty Emily Suzanne de Tournay. I knew he would not move until Lady Portarles had exhausted the subject, which will not be for another quarter of an hour at least, and it is 5 minutes to 1 now. He was preparing to go, and went up to the doorway where, drawing aside the curtain, he stood for a moment pointing out to Marguerite the distant figure of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes in close conversation with Lady Portarles. I think, he said with a triumphant smile, that I may safely expect to find the person I seek in the dining room, fair lady. There may be more than one. Whoever is there as the clock strikes 1, will be shadowed by one of my men. Of these, 1 or perhaps 2 or even 3 will leave for France tomorrow. One of these will be the Scarlet Pimpernel. Yes, and I also, fair lady, will leave for France tomorrow. The papers found at Dover upon the person of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes speak of the neighborhood of Calais, of an inn which I know well called Le Chat Gris, of a lonely place somewhere on the coast, the Père Blanchard's hut, which I must endeavor to find. All these places are given as the point where this meddlesome Englishman has bidden the traitor de Tournay and others to meet his emissaries. But it seems that he has decided not to send his emissaries, that he will start himself tomorrow. Now, one of those persons whom I shall see anon in the supper room, will be journeying to Calais, and I shall follow that person, until I have tracked him to where those fugitive aristocrats await him. For that person, fair lady, will be the man whom I have sought for nearly a year, the man whose energy has outdone me, whose ingenuity has baffled me, whose audacity has set me wondering, yes, me, who have seen a trick or 2 in my time, the mysterious and elusive Scarlet Pimpernel. And Armand, she pleaded, have I ever broken my word? I promise you that the day the Scarlet Pimpernel and I start for France, I will send you that imprudent letter of his by special courier. More than that, I will pledge you the word of France, that the day I lay hands on that meddlesome Englishman, Saint Just will be here in England, safe in the arms of his charming sister. And with a deep and elaborate bow and another look at the clock, Chauvelin glided out of the room. It seemed to Marguerite that through all the noise, all the din of music, dancing and laughter, she could hear his cat-like tread, gliding through the vast reception rooms, that she could hear him go down the massive staircase, reach the dining room and open the door. Fate had decided, had made her speak, had made her do a vile and abominable thing, for the sake of the brother she loved. She lay back in her chair, passive and still, seeing the figure of her relentless enemy ever present before her aching eyes. When Chauvelin reached the supper room it was quite deserted. It had that woebegone, forsaken, tawdry appearance, which reminds one so much of a ball dress the morning after. Half-empty glasses littered the table, unfolded napkins lay about, the chairs, turned towards one another in groups of twos and threes, seemed like the seats of ghosts in close conversation with one another. There were sets of 2 chairs, very close to one another, in the far corners of the room, which spoke of recent whispered flirtations, over cold game pie and champagne. There were sets of 3 and 4 chairs, that recalled pleasant, animated discussions over the latest scandals. There were chairs straight up in a row that still looked starchy, critical, acid, like antiquated dowagers. There were a few isolated, single chairs, close to the table, that spoke of gourmands intent on the most recherché dishes, and others overturned on the floor, that spoke volumes on the subject of my Lord Grenville's cellars. It was a ghost-like replica, in fact, of that fashionable gathering upstairs, a ghost that haunts every house where balls and good suppers are given, a picture drawn with white chalk on grey cardboard, dull and colorless, now that the bright silk dresses and gorgeously embroidered coats were no longer there to fill in the foreground, and now that the candles flickered sleepily in their sockets. Chauvelin smiled benignly, and rubbing his long thin hands together, he looked round the deserted supper room, whence even the last flunky had retired in order to join his friends in the hall below. All was silence in the dimly lighted room, whilst the sound of the gavotte, the hum of distant talk and laughter, and the rumble of an occasional coach outside, only seemed to reach this palace of the sleeping beauty as the murmur of some flitting spooks far away. It all looked so peaceful, so luxurious and so still, that the keenest observer, a veritable prophet, could never have guessed that, at this present moment, that deserted supper-room was nothing but a trap laid for the capture of the most cunning and audacious plotter those stirring times had ever seen. Chauvelin pondered and tried to peer into the immediate future. What would this man be like, whom he and the leaders of a whole revolution had sworn to bring to his death? Everything about him was weird and mysterious. His personality, which he had so cunningly concealed, the power he wielded over 19 English gentlemen who seemed to obey his every command blindly and enthusiastically, the passionate love and submission he had roused in his little trained band, and, above all, his marvelous audacity, the boundless impudence which had caused him to beard his most implacable enemies, within the very walls of Paris. No wonder that in France the sobriquet of the mysterious Englishman roused in the people a superstitious shudder. Chauvelin himself, as he gazed round the deserted room, where presently the weird hero would appear, felt a strange feeling of awe creeping all down his spine. But his plans were well laid. He felt sure that the Scarlet Pimpernel had not been warned, and felt equally sure that Marguerite Blakeney had not played him false. If she had, a cruel look, that would have made her shudder, gleamed in Chauvelin's keen pale eyes. If she had played him a trick, Armand St. just would suffer the extreme penalty. But no, of course she had not played him false. Fortunately the supper-room was deserted. This would make Chauvelin's task all the easier, when presently that unsuspecting enigma would enter it alone. No one was here now save Chauvelin himself. As he surveyed with a satisfied smile the solitude of the room, the cunning agent of the French government became aware of the peaceful, monotonous breathing of some one of my Lord Grenville's guests, who, no doubt, had supped both wisely and well, and was enjoying a quiet sleep, away from the din of the dancing above. Chauvelin looked round once more, and there in the corner of a sofa, in the dark angle of the room, his mouth open, his eyes shut, the sweet sounds of peaceful slumbers proceeding from his nostrils, reclined the gorgeously apparelled, long-limbed husband of the cleverest woman in Europe. Chauvelin looked at him as he lay there, placid, unconscious, at peace with all the world and himself, after the best of suppers, and a smile, that was almost one of pity, softened for a moment the hard lines of the Frenchman's face and the sarcastic twinkle of his pale eyes. Evidently the slumberer, deep in dreamless sleep, would not interfere with Chauvelin's trap for catching that cunning Scarlet Pimpernel. Again he rubbed his hands together, and following the example of Sir Percy Blakeney, he too stretched himself out in the corner of another sofa, shut his eyes, opened his mouth, gave forth sounds of peaceful breathing, and waited. Chapter 15. Doubt. Marguerite Blakeney had watched the slight sable-clad figure of Chauvelin, as he worked his way through the ballroom. Then perforce she had to wait, while her nerves tingled with excitement. Listlessly she sat in the small, still deserted boudoir, looking out through the curtained doorway on the dancing couples beyond, looking at them yet seeing nothing, hearing the music, yet conscious of naught save a feeling of expectancy, of anxious, weary waiting. Her mind conjured up before her the vision of what was, perhaps at this very moment, passing downstairs. The half-deserted dining room, the fateful hour, Chauvelin on the watch, Then, precise to the moment, the entrance of a man, he, the Scarlet Pimpernel, the mysterious leader, who to Marguerite had become almost unreal, so strange, so weird was this hidden identity. She wished she were in the supper room too at this moment, watching him as he entered. She knew that her woman's penetration would at once recognize in the stranger's face, whoever he might be, that strong individuality which belongs to a leader of men, to a hero, to the mighty high-soaring eagle whose daring wings were becoming entangled in the ferret's trap. Womanlike, she thought of him with unmixed sadness. The irony of that fate seemed so cruel which allowed the fearless lion to succumb to the gnawing of a rat. Had Armand's life not been at stake? "Faith, your ladyship must have thought me very remiss," said a voice suddenly, close to her elbow. "I had a deal of difficulty in delivering your message, for I could not find Blakeney anywhere at first." Marguerite had forgotten all about her husband and her message to him. His very name, as spoken by Lord Fancourt, sounded strange and unfamiliar to her, so completely had she in the last 5 minutes lived her old life in the Rue de Richelieu again, with Armand always near her to love and protect her, to guard her from the many subtle intrigues which were forever raging in Paris in those days. "I did find him at last," continued Lord Fancourt, "and gave him your message. He said that he would give orders at once for the horses to be put to." "Ah," she said, still very absently, "you found my husband and gave him my message?" "Yes, he was in the dining room fast asleep. I could not manage to wake him up at first." "Thank you very much," she said mechanically, trying to collect her thoughts. "Will your ladyship honor me with the contredanse until your coach is ready?" asked Lord Fancourt. "No, I thank you, my lord, but, and you will forgive me, I really am too tired, and the heat in the ballroom has become oppressive. The conservatory is deliciously cool. Let me take you there and then get you something. You seem ailing, Lady Blakeney." "I am only very tired," she repeated wearily as she allowed Lord Fancourt to lead her, where subdued lights and green plants lent coolness to the air. He got her a chair into which she sank. This long interval of waiting was intolerable. Why did not Chauvelin come and tell her the result of his watch? Lord Fancourt was very attentive. She scarcely heard what he said and suddenly startled him by asking abruptly, "Lord Fancourt, did you perceive who was in the dining room just now beside Sir Percy Blakeney?" "Only the agent of the French government, M. Chauvelin, equally fast asleep in another corner," he said. "Why does your ladyship ask?" "I know not." Did you notice the time when you were there? It must have been about 5 or 10 minutes past 1. I wonder what your ladyship is thinking about," he added, for evidently the fair lady's thoughts were very far away, and she had not been listening to his intellectual conversation. But indeed her thoughts were not very far away, only one story below in this same house, in the dining room where sat Chauvelin still on the watch. Had he failed? For one instant that possibility rose before her as a hope, the hope that the Scarlet Pimpernel had been warned by Sir Andrew, and that Chauvelin's trap had failed to catch his bird, but that hope soon gave way to fear. Had he failed? But then, Armand. Lord Fancourt had given up talking since he found that he had no listener. He wanted an opportunity for slipping away, for sitting opposite to a lady however fair, who is evidently not heeding the most vigorous efforts made for her entertainment, is not exhilarating, even to a cabinet minister. "Shall I find out if your ladyship's coach is ready?" he said at last tentatively. "Oh, thank you, if you would be so kind. I fear I am but sorry company, but I am really tired, and, perhaps, would be best alone." She had been longing to be rid of him, for she hoped that, like the fox he so resembled, Chauvelin would be prowling round, thinking to find her alone. But Lord Fancourt went and still Chauvelin did not come. What had happened? She felt Armand's fate trembling in the balance. She feared, now with a deadly fear, that Chauvelin had failed, and that the mysterious Scarlet Pimpernel had proved elusive once more. Then she knew that she need hope for no pity, no mercy from him. He had pronounced his either, or, and nothing less would content him. He was very spiteful, and would affect the belief that she had willfully misled him, and having failed to trap the eagle once again, his revengeful mind would be content with the humble prey, Armand. Yet she had done her best, had strained every nerve for Armand's sake. She could not bear to think that all had failed. She could not sit still, she wanted to go and hear the worst at once. She wondered even that Chauvelin had not come yet, to vent his wrath and satire upon her. Lord Grenville himself came presently to tell her that her coach was ready, and that Sir Percy was already waiting for her, ribbons in hand. Marguerite said farewell to her distinguished host. Many of her friends stopped her as she crossed the rooms to talk to her, and exchange pleasant au revoirs. The minister only took final leave of beautiful Lady Blakeney on the top of the stairs. Below, on the landing, a veritable army of gallant gentlemen were waiting to bid good-bye to the Queen of Beauty and Fashion, whilst outside, under the massive portico, Sir Percy's magnificent bays were impatiently pawing the ground. At the top of the stairs, just after she had taken final leave of her host, she suddenly saw Chauvelin. He was coming up the stairs slowly and rubbing his thin hands very softly together. There was a curious look on his mobile face, partly amused and wholly puzzled, and as his keen eyes met Marguerite's they became strangely sarcastic. Chauvelin, she said as he stopped on the top of the stairs, bowing elaborately before her, my coach is outside, may I claim your arm? As gallant as ever, he offered her his arm and led her downstairs. The crowd was very great. Some of the minister's guests were departing, others were leaning against the banisters watching the throng as it filed up and down the wide staircase. Chauvelin, she said at last desperately, I must know what has happened. What has happened, dear lady? He said with affected surprise. Where? When? You are torturing me, Chauvelin. I have helped you tonight. Surely I have the right to know. What happened in the dining room at 1 o'clock just now? She spoke in a whisper, trusting that in the general hubbub of the crowd her words would remain unheeded by all, save the man at her side. Quiet and peace reigned supreme, fair lady. At that hour I was asleep in the corner of one sofa and Sir Percy Blakeney in another. Nobody came into the room at all? Nobody. Then we have failed, you and I? Yes, we have failed, perhaps. But Armand, she pleaded. Armand St. Just chances hang on a thread. Pray heaven, dear lady, that that thread may not snap. Chauvelin, I worked for you sincerely, earnestly, remember. I remember my promise, he said quietly. The day that the Scarlet Pimpernel and I meet on French soil, Saint Just will be in the arms of his charming sister. Which means that a brave man's blood will be on my hands, she said with a shudder. His blood or that of your brother. Surely at the present moment you must hope, as I do, that the enigmatical Scarlet Pimpernel will start for Calais today. I am only conscious of one hope, citoyenne. And that is, that Satan, your master, will have need of you elsewhere before the sun rises today. You flatter me, citoyenne. She had detained him for a while, midway down the stairs, trying to get at the thoughts which lay beyond that thin fox-like mask. But Chauvelin remained urbane, sarcastic, mysterious. Not a line betrayed to the poor, anxious woman whether she need fear or whether she dared to hope. Downstairs on the landing she was soon surrounded. Lady Blakeney never stepped from any house into her coach, without an escort of fluttering human moths around the dazzling light of her beauty. But before she finally turned away from Chauvelin, she held out a tiny hand to him, with that pretty gesture of childish appeal which was so essentially her own. Give me some hope, my little Chauvelin, she pleaded. With perfect gallantry he bowed over that tiny hand, which looked so dainty and white through the delicately transparent black lace mitten, and kissing the tips of the rosy fingers. Pray heaven that the thread may not snap, he repeated with his enigmatic smile. And stepping aside, he allowed the moths to flutter more closely round the candle, and the brilliant throng of the jeunesse dorée, eagerly attentive to Lady Blakeney's every movement, hid the keen, fox-like face from her view. Chapter 16. Richmond. A few minutes later she was sitting, wrapped in costly furs, near Sir Percy Blakeney on the box seat of his magnificent coach, and the 4 splendid bays had thundered down the quiet street. The night was warm in spite of the gentle breeze which fanned Marguerite's burning cheeks. Soon London houses were left behind, and rattling over old Hammersmith Bridge, Sir Percy was driving his bays rapidly towards Richmond. The river wound in and out in its pretty delicate curves, looking like a silver serpent beneath the glittering rays of the moon. Long shadows from overhanging trees spread occasional deep palls right across the road. The bays were rushing along at breakneck speed, held but slightly back by Sir Percy's strong, unerring hands. These nightly drives after balls and suppers in London were a source of perpetual delight to Marguerite, and she appreciated her husband's eccentricity keenly, which caused him to adopt this mode of taking her home every night, to their beautiful home by the river, instead of living in a stuffy London house. He loved driving his spirited horses along the lonely, moonlit roads, and she loved to sit on the box seat, with the soft air of an English late summer's night fanning her face after the hot atmosphere of a ball or supper party. The drive was not a long one, less than an hour sometimes when the bays were very fresh and Sir Percy gave them full rein. Tonight he seemed to have a very devil in his fingers, and the coach seemed to fly along the road beside the river. As usual, he did not speak to her, but stared straight in front of him, the ribbon seeming to lie quite loosely in his slender, white hands. Marguerite looked at him tentatively once or twice. She could see his handsome profile and one lazy eye, with its straight fine brow and drooping heavy lid. The face in the moonlight looked singularly earnest, and recalled to Marguerite's aching heart those happy days of courtship, before he had become the lazy nincompoop, the effete fop, whose life seemed spent in card and supper rooms. But now, in the moonlight, she could not catch the expression of the lazy blue eyes. She could only see the outline of the firm chin, the corner of the strong mouth, the well-cut massive shape of the forehead. Truly, nature had meant well by Sir Percy. His faults must all be laid at the door of that poor half-crazy mother, and of the distracted heartbroken father, neither of whom had cared for the young life which was sprouting up between them, and which, perhaps, their very carelessness was already beginning to wreck. Marguerite suddenly felt intense sympathy for her husband. The moral crisis she had just gone through made her feel indulgent towards the faults, the delinquencies of others. How thoroughly a human being can be buffeted and overmastered by fate, had been borne in upon her with appalling force. Had anyone told her a week ago that she would stoop to spy upon her friends, that she would betray a brave and unsuspecting man into the hands of a relentless enemy, she would have laughed the idea to scorn. Yet she had done these things. Anon, perhaps the death of that brave man would be at her door, just as 2 years ago the Marquis de Saint-Cyr had perished through a thoughtless word of hers. But in that case she was morally innocent. She had meant no serious harm, fate merely had stepped in. But this time she had done a thing that obviously was base, had done it deliberately for a motive which, perhaps, high moralists would not even appreciate. And as she felt her husband's strong arm beside her, she also felt how much more he would dislike and despise her, if he knew of this night's work. Thus human beings judge of one another, superficially, casually, throwing contempt on one another with but little reason and no charity. She despised her husband for his inanities and vulgar, unintellectual occupations, and he, she felt, would despise her still worse, because she had not been strong enough to do right for right's sake, and to sacrifice her brother to the dictates of her conscience. Buried in her thoughts, Marguerite had found this hour in the breezy summer night all too brief, and it was with a feeling of keen disappointment that she suddenly realized that the bays had turned into the massive gates of her beautiful English home. Sir Percy Blakeney's house on the river has become a historic one. Palatial in its dimensions, it stands in the midst of exquisitely laid-out gardens, with a picturesque terrace and frontage to the river. Built in Tudor days, the old red brick of the walls looks eminently picturesque in the midst of a bower of green, the beautiful lawn, with its old sundial, adding the true note of harmony to its foreground. Great secular trees lent cool shadows to the grounds, and now, on this warm early autumn night, the leaves slightly turned to russets and gold, the old garden looked singularly poetic and peaceful in the moonlight. With unerring precision, Sir Percy had brought the 4 bays to a standstill immediately in front of the fine Elizabethan entrance hall. In spite of the lateness of the hour, an army of grooms seemed to have emerged from the very ground, as the coach had thundered up, and were standing respectfully round. Sir Percy jumped down quickly, then helped Marguerite to alight. She lingered outside for a moment, whilst he gave a few orders to one of his men. She skirted the house and stepped onto the lawn, looking out dreamily into the silvery landscape. Nature seemed exquisitely at peace in comparison with the tumultuous emotion she had gone through. She could faintly hear the ripple of the river and the occasional soft and ghost-like fall of a dead leaf from a tree. All else was quiet round her. She had heard the horses prancing as they were being led away to their distant stables, the hurrying of servants' feet as they had all gone within to rest. The house also was quite still. In 2 separate suites of apartments, just above the magnificent reception rooms, lights were still burning. They were her rooms and his, well divided from each other by the whole width of the house, as far apart as their own lives had become. Involuntarily she sighed. At that moment she could really not have told why. She was suffering from unconquerable heartache. Deeply and achingly she was sorry for herself. Never had she felt so pitiably lonely, so bitterly in want of comfort and of sympathy. With another sigh she turned away from the river towards the house, vaguely wondering if, after such a night, she could ever find rest and sleep. Suddenly, before she reached the terrace, she heard a firm step upon the crisp gravel, and the next moment her husband's figure emerged out of the shadow. He, too, had skirted the house and was wandering along the lawn towards the river. He still wore his heavy driving coat with the numerous lapels and collars he himself had set in fashion, but he had thrown it well back, burying his hands as was his wont, in the deep pockets of his satin breeches. The gorgeous white costume he had worn at Lord Grenville's ball, with its jabot of priceless lace, looked strangely ghostly against the dark background of the house. He apparently did not notice her, for after a few moments' pause, he presently turned back towards the house, and walked straight up to the terrace. "Sir Percy." He already had one foot on the lowest of the terrace steps, but at her voice he started and paused, then looked searchingly into the shadows whence she had called to him. She came forward quickly into the moonlight, and as soon as he saw her, he said, with that air of consummate gallantry he always wore when speaking to her, "At your service, madam." But his foot was still on the step, and in his whole attitude there was a remote suggestion, distinctly visible to her, that he wished to go, and had no desire for a midnight interview. "The air is deliciously cool," she said, "the moonlight peaceful and poetic, and the garden inviting. Will you not stay in it a while? The hour is not yet late, or is my company so distasteful to you, that you are in a hurry to rid yourself of it?" "Nay, madam," he rejoined placidly, "but 'tis on the other foot the shoe happens to be, and I'll warrant you'll find the midnight air more poetic without my company. No doubt the sooner I remove the obstruction the better your ladyship will like it." He turned once more to go. "I protest you mistake me, Sir Percy," she said hurriedly, and drawing a little closer to him, "the estrangement which, alas, has arisen between us, was none of my making, remember." "Begad, you must pardon me there, madam," he protested coldly, "my memory was always of the shortest." He looked her straight in the eyes, with that lazy nonchalance which had become second nature to him. She returned his gaze for a moment, then her eyes softened as she came up quite close to him to the foot of the terrace steps. "Of the shortest, Sir Percy? Faith, how it must have altered. Was it 3 years ago or 4 that you saw me for 1 hour in Paris on your way to the east? When you came back 2 years later you had not forgotten me." She looked divinely pretty as she stood there in the moonlight, with the fur cloak sliding off her beautiful shoulders, the gold embroidery on her dress shimmering around her, her childlike blue eyes turned up fully at him. He stood for a moment rigid and still, but for the clenching of his hand against the stone balustrade of the terrace. "You desired my presence, madam," he said frigidly. "I take it that it was not with a view to indulging in tender reminiscences." His voice certainly was cold and uncompromising, his attitude before her stiff and unbending. Womanly decorum would have suggested that Marguerite should return coldness for coldness, and should sweep past him without another word, only with a curt nod of the head, but womanly instinct suggested that she should remain, that keen instinct, which makes a beautiful woman conscious of her powers long to bring to her knees the one man who pays her no homage. She stretched out her hand to him. "Nay, Sir Percy, why not? The present is not so glorious but that I should not wish to dwell a little in the past." He bent his tall figure, and taking hold of the extreme tip of the fingers which she still held out to him, he kissed them ceremoniously. "Faith, madam," he said, "then you will pardon me if my dull wits cannot accompany you there." Once again he attempted to go, once more her voice, sweet, childlike, almost tender, called him back. "Sir Percy." "Your servant, madam." "Is it possible that love can die?" she said with sudden, unreasoning vehemence. "Methought that the passion which you once felt for me would outlast the span of human life. Is there nothing left of that love, Percy, which might help you, to bridge over that sad estrangement?" His massive figure seemed, while she spoke thus to him, to stiffen still more, the strong mouth hardened, a look of relentless obstinacy crept into the habitually lazy blue eyes. "With what object, I pray you, madam?" he asked coldly. "I do not understand you." "Yet, 'tis simple enough," he said with sudden bitterness, which seemed literally to surge through his words, though he was making visible efforts to suppress it. "I humbly put the question to you, for my slow wits are unable to grasp the cause of this, your ladyship's sudden new mood. Is it that you have the taste to renew the devilish sport which you played so successfully last year? Do you wish to see me once more a lovesick suppliant at your feet, so that you might again have the pleasure of kicking me aside, like a troublesome lapdog?" She had succeeded in rousing him for the moment, and again she looked straight at him, for it was thus she remembered him a year ago. "Percy, I entreat you," she whispered, "can we not bury the past? Pardon me, madam, but I understood you to say that your desire was to dwell in it." "Nay, I spoke not of that past, Percy," she said, while a tone of tenderness crept into her voice. "Rather did I speak of the time when you loved me still. And I was vain and frivolous. Your wealth and position allured me. I married you, hoping in my heart that your great love for me would beget in me a love for you. But, alas!" The moon had sunk low down behind a bank of clouds. In the east a soft gray light was beginning to chase away the heavy mantle of the night. He could only see her graceful outline now, the small queenly head, with its wealth of reddish golden curls, and the glittering gems forming the small star-shaped red flower which she wore as a diadem in her hair. 24 hours after our marriage, madame, the Marquis de Saint-Cyr and all his family perished on the guillotine, and the popular rumor reached me that it was the wife of Sir Percy Blakeney who helped to send them there. Nay, I myself told you the truth of that odious tale. Not till after it had been recounted to me by strangers, with all its horrible details. And you believed them then and there, she said with great vehemence, without a proof or question. You believed that I, whom you vowed you loved more than life, whom you professed you worshipped, that I could do a thing so base as these strangers chose to recount. You thought I meant to deceive you about it all, that I ought to have spoken before I married you. Yet had you listened, I would have told you that up to the very morning on which St. Cyr went to the guillotine, I was straining every nerve, using every influence I possessed to save him and his family. But my pride sealed my lips, when your love seemed to perish, as if under the knife of that same guillotine. Yet I would have told you how I was duped. I, whom that same popular rumor had endowed with the sharpest wits in France. I was tricked into doing this thing, by men who knew how to play upon my love for an only brother, and my desire for revenge. Was it unnatural? Her voice became choked with tears. She paused for a moment or two, trying to regain some sort of composure. She looked appealingly at him, almost as if he were her judge. He had allowed her to speak on in her own vehement, impassioned way, offering no comment, no word of sympathy. And now, while she paused, trying to swallow down the hot tears that gushed to her eyes, he waited, impassive and still. The dim, gray light of early dawn seemed to make his tall form look taller and more rigid. The lazy, good-natured face looked strangely altered. Marguerite, excited as she was, could see that the eyes were no longer languid, the mouth no longer good-humored and inane. A curious look of intense passion seemed to glow from beneath his drooping lids. The mouth was tightly closed, the lips compressed as if the will alone held that surging passion in check. Marguerite Blakeney was, above all, a woman with all a woman's fascinating foibles, all a woman's most lovable sins. She knew in a moment that for the past few months she had been mistaken, that this man who stood here before her, cold as a statue, when her musical voice struck upon his ear, loved her as he had loved her a year ago, that his passion might have been dormant, but that it was there, as strong, as intense, as overwhelming, as when first her lips met his in one long, maddening kiss. Pride had kept him from her, and woman-like, she meant to win back that conquest which had been hers before. Suddenly it seemed to her that the only happiness life could ever hold for her again would be in feeling that man's kiss once more upon her lips. "Listen to the tale, Sir Percy," she said, and her voice now was low, sweet, infinitely tender. "Armand was all in all to me. We had no parents and brought one another up. He was my little father and I, his tiny mother. We loved one another so. Then one day, do you mind me, Sir Percy? The Marquis de Saint-Cyr had my brother Armand thrashed by his lackeys, that brother whom I loved better than all the world. And his offense? That he, a plebeian, had dared to love the daughter of the aristocrat, for that he was waylaid and thrashed like a dog within an inch of his life. Oh, how I suffered! His humiliation had eaten into my very soul. When the opportunity occurred and I was able to take my revenge, I took it. But I only thought to bring that proud marquis to trouble and humiliation. He plotted with Austria against his own country. Chance gave me knowledge of this, I spoke of it, but I did not know. How could I guess? They trapped and duped me. When I realized what I had done, it was too late. It is perhaps a little difficult, madam, said Sir Percy after a moment of silence between them, to go back over the past. I have confessed to you that my memory is short, but the thought certainly lingered in my mind that, at the time of the Marquis' death, I entreated you for an explanation of those same noisome popular rumors. If that same memory does not even now play me a trick, I fancy that you refused me all explanation then, and demanded of my love a humiliating allegiance it was not prepared to give. I wished to test your love for me, and it did not bear the test. You used to tell me that you drew the very breath of life but for me and for love of me. And to probe that love, you demanded that I should forfeit mine honor, he said, whilst gradually his impassiveness seemed to leave him, his rigidity to relax, that I should accept without murmur or question, as a dumb and submissive slave, every action of my mistress. My heart overflowing with love and passion, I asked for no explanation. I waited for one, not doubting, only hoping. Had you spoken but one word, from you I would have accepted any explanation and believed it. But you left me without a word, beyond a bald confession of the actual horrible facts. Proudly you returned to your brother's house and left me alone. For weeks, not knowing now in whom to believe, since the shrine which contained my one illusion lay shattered to earth at my feet. She need not complain now that he was cold and impassive. His very voice shook with an intensity of passion, which he was making superhuman efforts to keep in check. The madness of my pride, she said sadly. Hardly had I gone, already I had repented. But when I returned I found you, oh so altered, wearing already that mask of somnolent indifference which you have never laid aside until now. She was so close to him that her soft, loose hair was wafted against his cheek. Her eyes, glowing with tears, maddened him, the music in her voice sent fire through his veins. But he would not yield to the magic charm of this woman whom he had so deeply loved, and at whose hands his pride had suffered so bitterly. He closed his eyes to shut out the dainty vision of that sweet face, of that snow-white neck and graceful figure, round which the faint rosy light of dawn was just beginning to hover playfully. "Nay, madam, it is no mask," he said icily. "I swore to you, once, that my life was yours. For months now it has been your plaything. It has served its purpose." But now she knew that that very coldness was a mask. The trouble, the sorrow she had gone through last night, suddenly came back to her mind, but no longer with bitterness, rather with a feeling that this man who loved her would help her to bear the burden. "Sir Percy," she said impulsively, "Heaven knows you have been at pains to make the task which I had set to myself terribly difficult to accomplish. You spoke of my mood just now. Well, we will call it that if you will. I wished to speak to you, because I was in trouble, and had need of your sympathy. It is yours to command, madam." "How cold you are," she sighed. "Faith, I can scarce believe that but a few months ago one tear in my eye had set you well nigh crazy. Now I come to you, with a half-broken heart, and, I pray you, madam," he said, whilst his voice shook almost as much as hers, "in what way can I serve you?" "Percy, Armand is in deadly danger. A letter of his, rash, impetuous as were all his actions, and written to Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, has fallen into the hands of a fanatic. Armand is hopelessly compromised. Tomorrow perhaps he will be arrested. After that the guillotine, unless, oh, it is horrible," she said with a sudden wail of anguish as all the events of the past night came rushing back to her mind. "Horrible, and you do not understand, you cannot, and I have no one to whom I can turn, for help, or even for sympathy." Tears now refused to be held back. All her trouble, her struggles, the awful uncertainty of Armand's fate overwhelmed her. She tottered, ready to fall, and leaning against the stone balustrade, she buried her face in her hands and sobbed bitterly. At first mention of Armand's just name and of the peril in which he stood, Sir Percy's face had become a shade more pale, and the look of determination and obstinacy appeared more marked than ever between his eyes. However, he said nothing for the moment, but watched her as her delicate frame was shaken with sobs, watched her until unconsciously his face softened, and what looked almost like tears seemed to glisten in his eyes. "And so," he said with bitter sarcasm, "the murderous dog of the revolution is turning upon the very hands that fed it? Begad, madam," he added very gently as Marguerite continued to sob hysterically, "will you dry your tears? I never could bear to see a pretty woman cry, and I—" Instinctively, with sudden, overmastering passion, at sight of her helplessness and of her grief, he stretched out his arms, and the next, would have seized her and held her to him, protected from every evil with his very life, his very heart's blood. But pride had the better of it in this struggle once again. He restrained himself with a tremendous effort of will, and said coldly, though still very gently, "Will you not turn to me, madam, and tell me in what way I may have the honor to serve you?" She made a violent effort to control herself, and turning her tear-stained face to him, she once more held out her hand, which he kissed with the same punctilious gallantry. But Marguerite's fingers, this time, lingered in his hand for a second or two longer than was absolutely necessary, and this was because she had felt that his hand trembled perceptibly and was burning hot, whilst his lips felt as cold as marble. "Can you do aught for Armand?" she said sweetly and simply. "You have so much influence at court. So many friends." "Nay, madam, should you not rather seek the influence of your French friend M. Chauvelin? His extends, if I mistake not, even as far as the Republican government of France." "I cannot ask him, Percy. I wish I dared to tell you, but, he has put a price on my brother's head, which—" She would have given worlds if she had felt the courage then to tell him everything, all she had done that night, how she had suffered and how her hand had been forced. But she dared not give way to that impulse. Not now, when she was just beginning to feel that he still loved her, when she hoped that she could win him back. She dared not make another confession to him. After all, he might not understand. He might not sympathize with her struggles and temptation. His love still dormant might sleep the sleep of death. Perhaps he divined what was passing in her mind. His whole attitude was one of intense longing, a veritable prayer for that confidence, which her foolish pride withheld from him. When she remained silent he sighed and said with marked coldness, "Faith, madam, since it distresses you, we will not speak of it. As for Armand, I pray you have no fear. I pledge you my word that he shall be safe. Now have I your permission to go? The hour is getting late and—" "You will at least accept my gratitude?" she said as she drew quite close to him and speaking with real tenderness. With a quick, almost involuntary effort he would have taken her then in his arms, for her eyes were swimming in tears, which he longed to kiss away, but she had lured him once, just like this, then cast him aside like an ill-fitting glove. He thought this was but a mood, a caprice, and he was too proud to lend himself to it once again. "It is too soon, madam," he said quietly. "I have done nothing as yet. The hour is late and you must be fatigued. Your women will be waiting for you upstairs." He stood aside to allow her to pass. She sighed, a quick sigh of disappointment. His pride and her beauty had been in direct conflict, and his pride had remained the conqueror. Perhaps after all she had been deceived just now. What she took to be the light of love in his eyes might only have been the passion of pride or, who knows, of hatred instead of love. She stood looking at him for a moment or two longer. He was again as rigid, as impassive as before. Pride had conquered and he cared not for her. The gray of dawn was gradually yielding to the rosy light of the rising sun. Birds began to twitter. Nature awakened, smiling in happy response to the warmth of this glorious October morning. Only between these two hearts there lay a strong, impassable barrier, built up of pride on both sides, which neither of them cared to be the first to demolish. He had bent his tall figure in a low ceremonious bow, as she finally, with another bitter little sigh, began to mount the terrace steps. The long train of her gold-embroidered gown swept the dead leaves off the steps, making a faint harmonious flash as she glided up, with one hand resting on the balustrade, the rosy light of dawn making an aureole of gold round her hair, and causing the rubies on her head and arms to sparkle. She reached the tall glass doors which led into the house. Before entering, she paused once again to look at him, hoping against hope to see his arms stretched out to her, and to hear his voice calling her back. But he had not moved. His massive figure looked the very personification of unbending pride, of fierce obstinacy. Hot tears again surged to her eyes, and as she would not let him see them, she turned quickly within, and ran as fast as she could up to her own rooms. Had she but turned back then and looked out once more on to the rose-lit garden, she would have seen that which would have made her own sufferings seem but light and easy to bear. A strong man, overwhelmed with his own passion and his own despair. Pride had given way at last, obstinacy was gone. The will was powerless. He was but a man madly, blindly, passionately in love, and as soon as her light footsteps had died away within the house, he knelt down upon the terrace steps, and in the very madness of his love he kissed one by one the places where her small foot had trodden, and the stone balustrade there, where her tiny hand had rested last. Chapter 17. Farewell. When Marguerite reached her room, she found her maid terribly anxious about her. "Your ladyship will be so tired," said the poor woman, whose own eyes were half closed with sleep. "It is past 5 o'clock. "Ah yes, Louise, I dare say I shall be tired presently," said Marguerite kindly, "but you are very tired now, so go to bed at once." "I'll get into bed alone." "But, my lady—" "Now don't argue, Louise, but go to bed. Give me a wrap and leave me alone." Louise was only too glad to obey. She took off her mistress's gorgeous ball dress, and wrapped her up in a soft billowy gown. "Does your ladyship wish for anything else?" she asked when that was done. "No, nothing more. Put out the lights as you go out." "Yes, my lady." "Good night, my lady." "Good night, Louise." When the maid was gone, Marguerite drew aside the curtains and threw open the windows. The garden and the river beyond were flooded with rosy light. Far away to the east, the rays of the rising sun had changed the rose into vivid gold. The lawn was deserted now, and Marguerite looked down upon the terrace where she had stood a few moments ago trying vainly to win back a man's love, which once had been so wholly hers. It was strange that through all her troubles, all her anxiety for Armand, she was mostly conscious at the present moment of a keen and bitter heartache. Her very limbs seemed to ache with longing for the love of a man who had spurned her, who had resisted her tenderness, remained cold to her appeals, and had not responded to the glow of passion, which had caused her to feel and hope that those happy olden days in Paris were not all dead and forgotten. How strange it all was. She loved him still. And now that she looked back upon the last few months of misunderstandings and of loneliness, she realized that she had never ceased to love him, that deep down in her heart she had always vaguely felt that his foolish inanities, his empty laugh, his lazy nonchalance were nothing but a mask, that the real man, strong, passionate, willful, was there still, the man she had loved, whose intensity had fascinated her, whose personality attracted her, since she always felt that behind his apparently slow wits there was a certain something which he kept hidden from all the world and most especially from her. A woman's heart is such a complex problem. The owner thereof is often most incompetent to find the solution of this puzzle. Did Marguerite Blakeney, the cleverest woman in Europe, really love a fool? Was it love that she had felt for him a year ago when she married him? Was it love she felt for him now that she realized that he still loved her, but that he would not become her slave, her passionate, ardent lover once again? Marguerite herself could not have told that. Not at this moment at any rate. Perhaps her pride had sealed her mind against a better understanding of her own heart. But this she did know, that she meant to capture that obstinate heart back again. That she would conquer once more, and then that she would never lose him. She would keep him, keep his love, deserve it, and cherish it. For this much was certain, that there was no longer any happiness possible for her without that one man's love. Thus the most contradictory thoughts and emotions rushed madly through her mind. Absorbed in them, she had allowed time to slip by. Perhaps, tired out with long excitement, she had actually closed her eyes and sunk into a troubled sleep, wherein quickly fleeting dreams seemed but the continuation of her anxious thoughts, when suddenly she was roused from dream or meditation, by the noise of footsteps outside her door. Nervously she jumped up and listened. The house itself was as still as ever. The footsteps had retreated. Through her wide-open windows the brilliant rays of the morning sun were flooding her room with light. She looked up at the clock. It was 6:30, too early for any of the household to be already astir. She certainly must have dropped to sleep, quite unconsciously. The noise of the footsteps, also of hushed, subdued voices had awakened her. What could they be? Gently, on tiptoe, she crossed the room and opened the door to listen. Not a sound, that peculiar stillness of the early morning when sleep with all mankind is at its heaviest. But the noise had made her nervous, and when, suddenly at her feet on the very doorstep, she saw something white lying there, a letter evidently, she hardly dared touch it. It seemed so ghost-like. It certainly was not there when she came upstairs. Had Louise dropped it? Or was some tantalizing spook at play, showing her fairy letters where none existed? At last she stooped to pick it up, and amazed, puzzled beyond measure, she saw that the letter was addressed to herself in her husband's large, business-like-looking hand. What could he have to say to her, in the middle of the night, which could not be put off until the morning? She tore open the envelope and read. A most unforeseen circumstance forces me to leave for the north immediately, so I beg your ladyship's pardon if I do not avail myself of the honor of bidding you good-bye. My business may keep me employed for about a week, so I shall not have the privilege of being present at your ladyship's water party on Wednesday. I remain your ladyship's most humble and most obedient servant, Percy Blakeney. Marguerite must suddenly have been imbued with her husband's slowness of intellect, for she had perforce to read the few simple lines over and over again, before she could fully grasp their meaning. She stood on the landing, turning over and over in her hand this curt and mysterious epistle, her mind a blank, her nerves strained with agitation and a presentiment she could not very well have explained. Sir Percy owned considerable property in the north, certainly, and he had often before gone there alone and stayed away a week at a time. But it seemed so very strange that circumstances should have arisen between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning that compelled him to start in this extreme hurry. Vainly she tried to shake off an unaccustomed feeling of nervousness. She was trembling from head to foot. A wild, unconquerable desire seized her to see her husband again at once, if only he had not already started. Forgetting the fact that she was only very lightly clad in a morning wrap, and that her hair lay loosely about her shoulders, she flew down the stairs, right through the hall towards the front door. It was as usual barred and bolted, for the indoor servants were not yet up, but her keen ears had detected the sound of voices and the pawing of a horse's hoof against the flagstones. With nervous, trembling fingers Marguerite undid the bolts one by one, bruising her hands, hurting her nails, for the locks were heavy and stiff. But she did not care. Her whole frame shook with anxiety at the very thought that she might be too late, that he might have gone without her seeing him and bidding him Godspeed. At last she had turned the key and thrown open the door. Her ears had not deceived her. A groom was standing close by holding a couple of horses. One of these was Sultan, Sir Percy's favorite and swiftest horse, saddled ready for a journey. The next moment Sir Percy himself appeared round the further corner of the house and came quickly towards the horses. He had changed his gorgeous ball costume, but was as usual irreproachably and richly apparelled in a suit of fine cloth, with lace jabot and ruffles, high-top boots and riding breeches. Marguerite went forward a few steps. He looked up and saw her. A slight frown appeared between his eyes. "You are going?" she said quickly and feverishly. "Whither?" "As I have had the honor of informing your ladyship, urgent, most unexpected business calls me to the north this morning," he said in his usual cold, drawly manner. "But, your guest tomorrow. I have prayed your ladyship to offer my humble excuses to his royal highness. You are such a perfect hostess, I do not think that I shall be missed. But surely you might have waited for your journey, until after our water party," she said, still speaking quickly and nervously. "Surely the business is not so urgent, and you said nothing about it, just now." "My business, as I had the honor to tell you, madam, is as unexpected as it is urgent. May I therefore crave your permission to go? Can I do aught for you in town? On my way back?" "No, no, thanks, nothing." "But you will be back soon?" "Very soon." "Before the end of the week?" "I cannot say." He was evidently trying to get away, while she was straining every nerve to keep him back for a moment or two. "Percy," she said, "will you not tell me why you go today? Surely I, as your wife, have the right to know. You have not been called away to the north." "I know it. There were no letters, no couriers from there before we left for the opera last night, and nothing was waiting for you when we returned from the ball. You are not going to the north, I feel convinced. There is some mystery, and—" "Nay, there is no mystery, madam," he replied with a slight tone of impatience. "My business has to do with Armand. There. Now have I your leave to depart?" "With Armand? But you will run no danger?" "Danger? Nay, madam, your solicitude does me honor. As you say, I have some influence. My intention is to exert it before it be too late. Will you allow me to thank you at least?" "Nay, madam," he said coldly, "there is no need for that. My life is at your service and I am already more than repaid. And mine will be at yours, Sir Percy, if you will but accept it in exchange for what you do for Armand," she said as impulsively she stretched out both her hands to him. "There. I will not detain you, my thoughts go with you. Farewell." How lovely she looked in this morning sunlight, with her ardent hair streaming around her shoulders. He bowed very low and kissed her hand. She felt the burning kiss and her heart thrilled with joy and hope. "You will come back?" she said tenderly. "Very soon," he replied, looking longingly into her blue eyes. "And, you will remember?" she asked as her eyes, in response to his look, gave him an infinity of promise. "I will always remember, madam, that you have honored me by commanding my services." The words were cold and formal, but they did not chill her this time. Her woman's heart had read his, beneath the impassive mask his pride still forced him to wear. He bowed to her again, then begged her leave to depart. She stood on one side whilst he jumped onto Sultan's back. Then, as he galloped out of the gates, she waved him a final adieu. A bend in the road soon hid him from view. His confidential groom had some difficulty in keeping pace with him, for Sultan flew along in response to his master's excited mood. Marguerite, with a sigh that was almost a happy one, turned and went within. She went back to her room, for suddenly, like a tired child, she felt quite sleepy. Her heart seemed all at once to be in complete peace, and though it still ached with undefined longing, a vague and delicious hope soothed it as with a balm. She felt no longer anxious about Armand. The man who had just ridden away, bent on helping her brother, inspired her with complete confidence in his strength and in his power. She marveled at herself for having ever looked upon him as an inane fool. Of course, that was a mask worn to hide the bitter wound she had dealt to his faith and to his love. His passion would have overmastered him, and he would not let her see how much he still cared and how deeply he suffered. But now all would be well. She would crush her own pride, humble it before him, tell him everything, trust him in everything, and those happy days would come back, when they used to wander off together in the forests of Fontainebleau, when they spoke little, for he was always a silent man, but when she felt that against that strong heart she would always find rest and happiness. The more she thought of the events of the past night, the less fear had she of Chauvelin and his schemes. He had failed to discover the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel, of that she felt sure. Both Lord Fancourt and Chauvelin himself had assured her that no one had been in the dining room at 1 o'clock except the Frenchman himself and Percy. Yes, Percy. She might have asked him had she thought of it. Anyway, she had no fears that the unknown and brave hero would fall in Chauvelin's trap. His death at any rate would not be at her door. Armand certainly was still in danger, but Percy had pledged his word that Armand would be safe, and somehow, as Marguerite had seen him riding away, the possibility that he could fail in whatever he undertook never even remotely crossed her mind. When Armand was safely over in England, she would not allow him to go back to France. She felt almost happy now, and drawing the curtains closely together again to shut out the piercing sun, she went to bed at last, laid her head upon the pillow, and like a wearied child, soon fell into a peaceful and dreamless sleep. Chapter 18. The Mysterious Device. The day was well advanced when Marguerite woke, refreshed by her long sleep. Louise had brought her some fresh milk and a dish of fruit, and she partook of this frugal breakfast with hearty appetite. Thoughts crowded thick and fast in her mind as she munched her grapes. Most of them went galloping away after the tall, erect figure of her husband, whom she had watched riding out of sight more than 5 hours ago. In answer to her eager inquiries, Louise brought back the news that the groom had come home with Sultan, having left Sir Percy in London. The groom thought that his master was about to get on board his schooner, which was lying off just below London Bridge. Sir Percy had ridden thus far, had then met Briggs, the skipper of the Daydream, and had sent the groom back to Richmond with Sultan and the empty saddle. This news puzzled Marguerite more than ever. Where could Sir Percy be going just now in the Daydream? On Armand's behalf, he had said. Well, Sir Percy had influential friends everywhere. Perhaps he was going to Greenwich but Marguerite ceased to conjecture. All would be explained anon. He said that he would come back and that he would remember. A long, idle day lay before Marguerite. She was expecting the visit of her old schoolfellow, little Suzanne de Tournay. With all the merry mischief at her command, she had tendered her request for Suzanne's company to the Countess in the presence of the Prince of Wales last night. His Royal Highness had loudly applauded the notion, and declared that he would give himself the pleasure of calling on the two ladies in the course of the afternoon. The Countess had not dared to refuse, and there was entrapped into a promise to send little Suzanne to spend a long and happy day at Richmond with her friend. Marguerite expected her eagerly. She longed for a chat about old schooldays with the child. She felt that she would prefer Suzanne's company to that of anyone else, and together they would roam through the fine old garden and rich deer park, or stroll along the river. But Suzanne had not come yet, and Marguerite, being dressed, prepared to go downstairs. She looked quite a girl this morning in her simple muslin frock, with a broad blue sash round her slim waist, and the dainty crossover fichu into which, at her bosom, she had fastened a few late crimson roses. She crossed the landing outside her own suite of apartments, and stood still for a moment at the head of the fine oak staircase, which led to the lower floor. On her left were her husband's apartments, a suite of rooms which she practically never entered. They consisted of bedroom, dressing and reception room, and at the extreme end of the landing of a small study, which, when Sir Percy did not use it, was always kept locked. His own special and confidential valet, Frank, had charge of this room. No one was ever allowed to go inside. My lady had never cared to do so, and the other servants had, of course, not dared to break this hard and fast rule. Marguerite had often, with that good-natured contempt which she had recently adopted towards her husband, chaffed him about this secrecy which surrounded his private study. Laughingly, she had always declared that he strictly excluded all prying eyes from his sanctum for fear they should detect how very little study went on within its four walls. A comfortable armchair for Sir Percy's sweet slumbers was, no doubt, its most conspicuous piece of furniture. Marguerite thought of all this on this bright October morning as she glanced along the corridor. Frank was evidently busy with his master's rooms, for most of the doors stood open, that of the study amongst the others. A sudden, burning, childish curiosity seized her to have a peep at Sir Percy's sanctum. The restriction, of course, did not apply to her, and Frank would, of course, not dare to oppose her. Still, she hoped that the valet would be busy in one of the other rooms, that she might have that one quick peep in secret and unmolested. Gently, on tiptoe, she crossed the landing and, like Bluebeard's wife, trembling half with excitement and wonder, she paused a moment on the threshold, strangely perturbed and irresolute. The door was ajar and she could not see anything within. She pushed it open tentatively. There was no sound. Frank was evidently not there, and she walked boldly in. At once she was struck by the severe simplicity of everything around her. The dark and heavy hangings, the massive oak furniture, the one or two maps on the wall, in no way recalled to her mind the lazy man about town, the lover of racecourses, the dandified leader of fashion, that was the outward representation of Sir Percy Blakeney. There was no sign here at any rate of hurried departure. Everything was in its place, not a scrap of paper littered the floor, not a cupboard or drawer was left open. The curtains were drawn aside, and through the open window the fresh morning air was streaming in. Facing the window and well into the center of the room, stood a ponderous business-like desk, which looked as if it had seen much service. On the wall to the left of the desk, reaching almost from floor to ceiling, was a large full-length portrait of a woman, magnificently framed, exquisitely painted, and signed with the name of Boucher. It was Percy's mother. Marguerite knew very little about her, except that she had died abroad, ailing in body as well as in mind, when Percy was still a lad. She must have been a very beautiful woman once, when Boucher painted her, and as Marguerite looked at the portrait, she could not but be struck by the extraordinary resemblance which must have existed between mother and son. There was the same low, square forehead, crowned with thick, fair hair, smooth and heavy, the same deep-set, somewhat lazy blue eyes beneath firmly marked, straight brows, and in those eyes there was the same intensity behind that apparent laziness, the same latent passion which used to light up Percy's face in the olden days before his marriage, and which Marguerite had again noted last night at dawn, when she had come quite close to him, and had allowed a note of tenderness to creep into her voice. Marguerite studied the portrait, for it interested her. After that she turned and looked again at the ponderous desk. It was covered with a mass of papers, all neatly tied and docketed, which looked like accounts and receipts arrayed with perfect method. It had never before struck Marguerite, nor had she, alas, found it worth while to inquire, as to how Sir Percy, whom all the world had credited with a total lack of brains, administered the vast fortune which his father had left him. Since she had entered this neat, orderly room, she had been taken so much by surprise, that this obvious proof of her husband's strong business capacities did not cause her more than a passing thought of wonder. But it also strengthened her in the now certain knowledge that, with his worldly inanities, his foppish ways and foolish talk, he was not only wearing a mask, but was playing a deliberate and studied part. Marguerite wondered again. Why should he take all this trouble? Why should he, who was obviously a serious, earnest man, wish to appear before his fellow-men as an empty-headed nincompoop? He may have wished to hide his love for a wife who held him in contempt, but surely such an object could have been gained at less sacrifice, and with far less trouble than constant incessant acting of an unnatural part. She looked round her quite aimlessly now. She was horribly puzzled, and a nameless dread before all this strange, unaccountable mystery had begun to seize upon her. She felt cold and uncomfortable suddenly in this severe and dark room. There were no pictures on the wall, save the fine Boucher portrait, only a couple of maps, both of parts of France, one of the north coast and the other of the environs of Paris. What did Sir Percy want with those, she wondered. Her head began to ache. She turned away from this strange Bluebeard's chamber, which she had entered, and which she did not understand. She did not wish Frank to find her here, and with a last look round, she once more turned to the door. As she did so, her foot knocked against a small object, which had apparently been lying close to the desk on the carpet, and which now went rolling right across the room. She stooped to pick it up. It was a solid gold ring with a flat shield, on which was engraved a small device. Marguerite turned it over in her fingers, and then studied the engraving on the shield. It represented a small star-shaped flower, of a shape she had seen so distinctly twice before, once at the opera and once at Lord Grenville's ball. Chapter 19. The Scarlet Pimpernel. At what particular moment the strange doubt first crept into Marguerite's mind, she could not herself afterwards have said. With the ring tightly clutched in her hand, she had run out of the room, down the stairs and out into the garden, where, in complete seclusion, alone with the flowers and the river and the birds, she could look again at the ring and study that device more closely. Stupidly, senselessly now, sitting beneath the shade of an overhanging sycamore, she was looking at the plain gold shield, with the star-shaped little flower engraved upon it. Bah! It was ridiculous. She was dreaming. Her nerves were overwrought, and she saw signs and mysteries in the most trivial coincidences. Had not everybody about town recently made a point of affecting the device of that mysterious and heroic Scarlet Pimpernel? Did she not herself wear it embroidered on her gowns? Set in gems and enamel in her hair? What was there strange in the fact that Sir Percy should have chosen to use the device as a seal ring? He might easily have done that. Yes, quite easily, and, besides, what connection could there be between her exquisite dandy of a husband, with his fine clothes and refined lazy ways, and the daring plotter who rescued French victims from beneath the very eyes of the leaders of a bloodthirsty revolution? Her thoughts were in a whirl, her mind a blank. She did not see anything that was going on around her, and was quite startled when a fresh young voice called to her across the garden. "Sherry, Sherry? Where are you?" And little Suzanne, fresh as a rosebud, with eyes dancing with glee and brown curls fluttering in the soft morning breeze, came running across the lawn. "They told me you were in the garden," she went on prattling merrily, and throwing herself with pretty girlish impulse into Marguerite's arms, "so I ran out to give you a surprise. You did not expect me quite so soon, did you, my darling little Margot Sherry?" Marguerite, who had hastily concealed the ring in the folds of her kerchief, tried to respond gaily and unconcernedly to the young girl's impulsiveness. "Indeed, sweet one," she said with a smile, "it is delightful to have you all to myself and for a nice whole long day. You won't be bored." "Oh, bored? Margot, how can you say such a wicked thing? What? When we were in the dear old convent together, we were always happy when we were allowed to be alone together. And to talk secrets." The two young girls had linked their arms in one another's and began wandering round the garden. "Oh, how lovely your home is, Margot darling," said little Suzanne enthusiastically, "and how happy you must be." "I indeed. I ought to be happy, oughtn't I, sweet one?" said Marguerite with a wistful little sigh. "How sadly you say it, Sherry. Ah, well, I suppose now that you are a married woman you won't care to talk secrets with me any longer. What lots and lots of secrets we used to have at school. Do you remember? Some we did not even confide to Sister Teresa of the Holy Angels, though she was such a dear. And now you have one all-important secret, little one," said Marguerite merrily, "which you are forthwith going to confide to me. Nay, you need not blush, Sherry," she added as she saw Suzanne's pretty little face crimson with blushes. "Faith, there's naught to be ashamed of. He is a noble and true man, and one to be proud of as a lover and as a husband." "Indeed, Sherry, I am not ashamed," rejoined Suzanne softly, "and it makes me very, very proud to hear you speak so well of him. I think Maman will consent," she added thoughtfully, "and I shall be, oh, so happy, but, of course, nothing is to be thought of until Papa is safe." Marguerite started. Suzanne's father, the Comte de Tournay, one of those whose life would be jeopardized if Chauvelin succeeded in establishing the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel. She had understood all along from the Comtesse, and also from one or two of the members of the League, that their mysterious leader had pledged his honor to bring the fugitive Comte de Tournay safely out of France. Whilst little Suzanne, unconscious of all, save her own all-important little secret, went prattling on, Marguerite's thoughts went back to the events of the past night. Armand's peril, Chauvelin's threat, his cruel either, or, which she had accepted. And then her own work in the matter, which should have culminated at 1 o'clock in Lord Grenville's dining room, when the relentless agent of the French government would finally learn who was this mysterious Scarlet Pimpernel, who so openly defied an army of spies and placed himself so boldly, and for mere sport, on the side of the enemies of France. Since then she had heard nothing from Chauvelin. She had concluded that he had failed, and yet she had not felt anxious about Armand, because her husband had promised her that Armand would be safe. But now, suddenly, as Suzanne prattled merrily along, an awful horror came upon her for what she had done. Chauvelin had told her nothing, it was true, but she remembered how sarcastic and evil he looked when she took final leave of him after the ball. Had he discovered something then? Had he already laid his plans for catching the daring plotter, red-handed, in France, and sending him to the guillotine without compunction or delay? Marguerite turned sick with horror, and her hand convulsively clutched the ring in her dress. "You are not listening, Sherry," said Suzanne reproachfully as she paused in her long, highly interesting narrative. "Yes, yes, darling, indeed I am," said Marguerite with an effort, forcing herself to smile. "I love to hear you talking, and your happiness makes me so very glad. Have no fear, we will manage to propitiate Maman. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes is a noble English gentleman. He has money and position, the Comtesse will not refuse her consent. But, now little one, tell me, what is the latest news about your father?" "Oh," said Suzanne with mad glee, "the best we could possibly hear. My Lord Hastings came to see Maman early this morning. He said that all is now well with dear Papa, and we may safely expect him here in England in less than 4 days. "Yes," said Marguerite, whose glowing eyes were fastened on Suzanne's lips as she continued merrily. "Oh, we have no fear now. You don't know, Sherry, that great and noble Scarlet Pimpernel himself has gone to save Papa. He has gone, Sherry, actually gone," added Suzanne excitedly. "He was in London this morning, he will be in Calais perhaps tomorrow, where he will meet Papa, and then, the blow had fallen. She had expected it all along, though she had tried for the last half-hour to delude herself and to cheat her fears. He had gone to Calais, had been in London this morning. He, the Scarlet Pimpernel. Percy Blakeney, her husband, whom she had betrayed last night to Chauvelin. Percy, her husband, the Scarlet Pimpernel. How could she have been so blind? She understood it now, all at once. That part he played, the mask he wore, in order to throw dust in everybody's eyes. And all for sheer sport and devilry, of course. Saving men, women and children from death as other men destroy and kill animals for the excitement, the love of the thing. The idle, rich man wanted some aim in life. He, and the few young bucks he enrolled under his banner, had amused themselves for months in risking their lives for the sake of an innocent few. Perhaps he had meant to tell her when they were first married, and then the story of the Marquis de Saint Cyr had come to his ears, and he had suddenly turned from her, thinking, no doubt, that she might some day betray him and his comrades, who had sworn to follow him, and so he had tricked her as he tricked all others, whilst hundreds now owed their lives to him, and many families owed him both life and happiness. The mask of the inane fop had been a good one, and the part consummately well played. No wonder that Chauvelin's spies had failed to detect, in the apparently brainless nincompoop, the man whose reckless daring and resourceful ingenuity had baffled the keenest French spies, both in France and in England. Even last night when Chauvelin went to Lord Grenville's dining room to seek that daring Scarlet Pimpernel, he only saw that inane Sir Percy Blakeney fast asleep in a corner of the sofa. Had his astute mind guessed the secret, then? Here lay the whole awful, horrible, amazing puzzle. In betraying a nameless stranger to his fate in order to save her brother, had Marguerite Blakeney sent her husband to his death? No, no, no. 1,000 times no. Surely fate could not deal a blow like that. Nature itself would rise in revolt. Her hand, when it held that tiny scrap of paper last night, would surely have been struck numb ere it committed a deed so appalling and so terrible. But what is it, Sherry? Said little Suzanne, now genuinely alarmed, for Marguerite's color had become dull and ashen. Are you ill, Marguerite? What is it? Nothing, nothing, child, she murmured as in a dream. Wait a moment, let me think. Think? You said, the Scarlet Pimpernel had gone today. Marguerite, Sherry, what is it? You frighten me. It is nothing, child, I tell you, nothing. I must be alone a minute, and, dear one, I may have to curtail our time together today. I may have to go away, you'll understand? I understand that something has happened, Sherry, and that you want to be alone. I won't be a hindrance to you. Don't think of me. My maid Lucille has not yet gone. We will go back together. Don't think of me. She threw her arms impulsively round Marguerite. Child as she was, she felt the poignancy of her friend's grief, and with the infinite tact of her girlish tenderness, she did not try to pry into it, but was ready to efface herself. She kissed Marguerite again and again, then walked sadly back across the lawn. Marguerite did not move, she remained there, thinking, wondering what was to be done. Just as little Suzanne was about to mount the terrace steps, a groom came running round the house towards his mistress. He carried a sealed letter in his hand. Suzanne instinctively turned back. Her heart told her that here perhaps was further ill news for her friend, and she felt that her poor Margot was not in a fit state to bear any more. The groom stood respectfully beside his mistress, then he handed her the sealed letter. What is that? Asked Marguerite. Just come by runner, my lady. Marguerite took the letter mechanically and turned it over in her trembling fingers. Who sent it? She said. The runner said, my lady, replied the groom, that his orders were to deliver this, and that your ladyship would understand from whom it came. Marguerite tore open the envelope. Already her instinct had told her what it contained, and her eyes only glanced at it mechanically. It was a letter written by Armand St. Just to Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, the letter which Chauvelin's spies had stolen at the Fisherman's Rest, and which Chauvelin had held as a rod over her to enforce her obedience. Now he had kept his word. He had sent her back St. Just's compromising letter, for he was on the track of the Scarlet Pimpernel. Marguerite's senses reeled, her very soul seemed to be leaving her body. She tottered, and would have fallen but for Suzanne's arm round her waist. With superhuman effort she regained control over herself. There was yet much to be done. Bring that runner here to me, she said to the servant with much calm. He has not gone? No, my lady. The groom went, and Marguerite turned to Suzanne. And you, child, run within. Tell Lucille to get ready. I fear I must send you home, child. And, stay, tell one of the maids to prepare a traveling dress and cloak for me. Suzanne made no reply. She kissed Marguerite tenderly and obeyed without a word. The child was overawed by the terrible, nameless misery in her friend's face. A minute later the groom returned, followed by the runner who had brought the letter. "Who gave you this packet?" asked Marguerite. "A gentleman, my lady," replied the man, "at the Rose and Thistle, in opposite Charing Cross. He said you would understand." "At the Rose and Thistle? What was he doing?" "He was waiting for the coach, your ladyship, which he had ordered." "The coach?" "Yes, my lady. A special coach he had ordered. I understood from his man that he was posting straight to Dover." "That's enough. You may go." Then she turned to the groom. "My coach and the 4 swiftest horses in the stables to be ready at once." The groom and runner both went quickly off to obey. Marguerite remained standing for a moment on the lawn quite alone. Her graceful figure was as rigid as a statue, her eyes were fixed, her hands were tightly clasped across her breast. Her lips moved as they murmured with pathetic heart-breaking persistence. "What's to be done? What's to be done? Where to find him? Oh God, grant me light." But this was not the moment for remorse and despair. She had done, unwittingly, an awful and terrible thing, the very worst crime in her eyes that woman ever committed. She saw it in all its horror. Her very blindness in not having guessed her husband's secret seemed now to her another deadly sin. She ought to have known. She ought to have known. How could she imagine that a man who could love with so much intensity as Percy Blakeney had loved her from the first? How could such a man be the brainless idiot he chose to appear? She, at least, ought to have known that he was wearing a mask, and having found that out, she should have torn it from his face, whenever they were alone together. Her love for him had been paltry and weak, easily crushed by her own pride, and she too had worn a mask in assuming a contempt for him, whilst as a matter of fact she completely misunderstood him. But there was no time now to go over the past. By her own blindness she had sinned. Now she must repay not by empty remorse but by prompt and useful action. Percy had started for Calais, utterly unconscious of the fact that his most relentless enemy was on his heels. He had set sail early that morning from London Bridge. Provided he had a favorable wind, he would no doubt be in France within 24 hours. No doubt he had reckoned on the wind and chosen this route. Chauvelin, on the other hand, would post to Dover, charter a vessel there, and undoubtedly reach Calais much about the same time. Once in Calais, Percy would meet all those who were eagerly waiting for the noble and brave Scarlet Pimpernel, who had come to rescue them from horrible and unmerited death. With Chauvelin's eyes now fixed upon his every movement, Percy would thus not only be endangering his own life, but that of Suzanne's father, the old Comte de Tournay, and of those other fugitives who were waiting for him and trusting in him. There was also Armand, who had gone to meet de Tournay, secure in the knowledge that the Scarlet Pimpernel was watching over his safety. All these lives, and that of her husband, lay in Marguerite's hands. These she must save if human pluck and ingenuity were equal to the task. Unfortunately, she could not do all this quite alone. Once in Calais she would not know where to find her husband, whilst Chauvelin, in stealing the papers at Dover, had obtained the whole itinerary. Above everything she wished to warn Percy. She knew enough about him by now to understand that he would never abandon those who trusted in him, that he would not turn back from danger, and leave the Comte de Tournay to fall into the bloodthirsty hands that knew of no mercy. But if he were warned, he might form new plans, be more wary, more prudent. Unconsciously he might fall into a cunning trap, but, once warned, he might yet succeed. And if he failed, if indeed fate and Chauvelin, with all the resources at his command, proved too strong for the daring plotter after all, then at least she would be there by his side to comfort, love and cherish, to cheat death perhaps at the last by making it seem sweet, if they died both together, locked in each other's arms, with the supreme happiness of knowing that passion had responded to passion, and that all misunderstandings were at an end. Her whole body stiffened as with a great and firm resolution. This she meant to do if God gave her wits and strength. Her eyes lost their fixed look. They glowed with inward fire at the thought of meeting him again so soon, in the very midst of most deadly perils. They sparkled with the joy of sharing these dangers with him, of helping him perhaps, of being with him at the last, if she failed. The childlike sweet face had become hard and set, the curved mouth was closed tightly over her clenched teeth. She meant to do or die with him and for his sake. A frown, which spoke of an iron will and unbending resolution, appeared between the two straight brows. Already her plans were formed. She would go and find Sir Andrew Ffoulkes first. He was Percy's best friend, and Marguerite remembered with a thrill, with what blind enthusiasm the young man always spoke of his mysterious leader. He would help her where she needed help. Her coach was ready. A change of raiment, and a farewell to little Suzanne, and she could be on her way. Without haste but without hesitation she walked quietly into the house. Chapter 20. The Friend. Less than half an hour later Marguerite, buried in thoughts, sat inside her coach, which was bearing her swiftly to London. She had taken an affectionate farewell of little Suzanne, and seen the child safely started with her maid, and in her own coach, back to town. She had sent one courier with a respectful letter of excuse to His Royal Highness, begging for a postponement of the August visit on account of pressing and urgent business, and another on ahead to bespeak a fresh relay of horses at Faversham. Then she had changed her muslin frock for a dark travelling costume and mantle, had provided herself with money, which her husband's lavishness always placed fully at her disposal, and had started on her way. She did not attempt to delude herself with any vain and futile hopes. The safety of her brother Armand was to have been conditional on the imminent capture of the Scarlet Pimpernel. As Chauvelin had sent her back Armand's compromising letter, there was no doubt that he was quite satisfied in his own mind that Percy Blakeney was the man whose death he had sworn to bring about. No, there was no room for any fond delusions. Percy, the husband whom she loved with all the ardor which her admiration for his bravery had kindled, was in immediate deadly peril through her hand. She had betrayed him to his enemy, unwittingly 'tis true, but she had betrayed him, and if Chauvelin succeeded in trapping him, who so far was unaware of his danger, then his death would be at her door. His death, when with her very heart's blood she would have defended him and given willingly her life for his. She had ordered her coach to drive her to the Crown Inn. Once there she told her coachman to give the horses food and rest. Then she ordered a chair, and had herself carried to the house in Pall Mall where Sir Andrew Ffoulkes lived. Among all Percy's friends who were enrolled under his daring banner, she felt that she would prefer to confide in Sir Andrew Ffoulkes. He had always been her friend, and now his love for little Suzanne had brought him closer to her still. Had he been away from home, gone on the mad errand with Percy perhaps, then she would have called on Lord Hastings or Lord Tony, for she wanted the help of one of these young men, or she would be indeed powerless to save her husband. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, however, was at home, and his servant introduced her ladyship immediately. She went upstairs to the young man's comfortable bachelor's chambers, and was shown into a small, though luxuriously furnished, dining room. A moment or two later Sir Andrew himself appeared. He had evidently been much startled when he heard who his lady visitor was, for he looked anxiously, even suspiciously, at Marguerite, whilst performing the elaborate bows before her, which the rigid etiquette of the time demanded. Marguerite had laid aside every vestige of nervousness, she was perfectly calm, and having returned the young man's elaborate salute, she began very calmly. "Sir Andrew, I have no desire to waste valuable time in much talk. You must take certain things I am going to tell you for granted. These will be of no importance. What is important is that your leader and comrade, the Scarlet Pimpernel, my husband, Percy Blakeney, is in deadly peril." Had she had the remotest doubt of the correctness of her deductions, she would have had them confirmed now, for Sir Andrew, completely taken by surprise, had grown very pale, and was quite incapable of making the slightest attempt at clever parrying. "No matter how I know this, Sir Andrew," she continued quietly, "thank God that I do, and that perhaps it is not too late to save him. Unfortunately, I cannot do this quite alone, and therefore have come to you for help." "Lady Blakeney," said the young man, trying to recover himself. "Will you hear me first?" she interrupted. "This is how the matter stands. When the agent of the French government stole your papers that night in Dover, he found amongst them certain plans, which you or your leader meant to carry out for the rescue of the Comte de Tournay and others. The Scarlet Pimpernel, Percy my husband, has gone on this errand himself today. Chauvelin knows that the Scarlet Pimpernel and Percy Blakeney are one and the same person. He will follow him to Calais, and there will lay hands on him. You know as well as I do the fate that awaits him at the hands of the revolutionary government of France. No interference from England, from King George himself, would save him. Robespierre and his gang would see to it that the interference came too late. But not only that, the much-trusted leader will also have been unconsciously the means of revealing the hiding place of the Comte de Tournay and of all those who even now are placing their hopes in him." She had spoken quietly, dispassionately, and with firm, unbending resolution. Her purpose was to make that young man trust and help her, for she could do nothing without him. "I do not understand," he repeated, trying to gain time, to think what was best to be done. But I think you do, Sir Andrew. You must know that I am speaking the truth. Look these facts straight in the face. Percy has sailed for Calais, I presume for some lonely part of the coast, and Chauvelin is on his track. He has posted for Dover and will cross the channel probably tonight. What do you think will happen?" The young man was silent. "Percy will arrive at his destination. Unconscious of being followed, he will seek out de Tournay and the others. Among these is Armand St. Just, my brother, he will seek them out, one after another, probably not knowing that the sharpest eyes in the world are watching his every movement. When he has thus unconsciously betrayed those who blindly trust in him, when nothing can be gained from him, and he is ready to come back to England, with those whom he has gone so bravely to save, the doors of the trap will close upon him, and he will be sent to end his noble life upon the guillotine." Still Sir Andrew was silent. "You do not trust me," she said passionately. "Oh God! Cannot you see that I am in deadly earnest? Man," she added, while with her tiny hands she seized the young man suddenly by the shoulders, forcing him to look straight at her, "tell me, do I look like that vilest thing on earth, a woman who would betray her own husband?" "God forbid, Lady Blakeney," said the young man at last, "that I should attribute such evil motives to you, but what? Tell me. Quick, man. The very seconds are precious. Will you tell me," he asked resolutely and looking searchingly into her blue eyes, "whose hand helped to guide M. Chauvelin to the knowledge which you say he possesses?" "Mine," she said quietly. "I own it. I will not lie to you, for I wish you to trust me absolutely. But I had no idea, how could I have, of the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel, and my brother's safety was to be my prize if I succeeded. In helping Chauvelin to track the Scarlet Pimpernel?" She nodded. "It is no use telling you how he forced my hand. Armand is more than a brother to me and, how could I guess? But we waste time, Sir Andrew. Every second is precious. In the name of God. My husband is in peril. Your friend, your comrade, help me to save him." Sir Andrew felt his position to be a very awkward one. The oath he had taken before his leader and comrade was one of obedience and secrecy, and yet the beautiful woman who was asking him to trust her was undoubtedly in earnest. His friend and leader was equally undoubtedly in imminent danger and, "Lady Blakeney," he said at last, "God knows you have perplexed me so that I do not know which way my duty lies. Tell me what you wish me to do. There are 19 of us ready to lay down our lives for the Scarlet Pimpernel if he is in danger." "There is no need for lives just now, my friend," she said drily. "My wits and 4 swift horses will serve the necessary purpose. But I must know where to find him. See," she added, while her eyes filled with tears, "I have humbled myself before you, I have owned my fault to you. Shall I also confess my weakness? My husband and I have been estranged because he did not trust me, and because I was too blind to understand. You must confess that the bandage which he put over my eyes was a very thick one. Is it small wonder that I did not see through it? But last night, after I led him unwittingly into such deadly peril, it suddenly fell from my eyes. If you will not help me, Sir Andrew, I would still strive to save my husband. I would still exert every faculty I possess for his sake, but I might be powerless, for I might arrive too late, and nothing would be left for you but lifelong remorse and, for me, a broken heart." "But, Lady Blakeney," said the young man, touched by the gentle earnestness of this exquisitely beautiful woman, "do you know that what you propose doing is man's work? You cannot possibly journey to Calais alone. You would be running the greatest possible risks to yourself, and your chances of finding your husband now, were I to direct you ever so carefully, are infinitely remote." "Oh, I hope there are risks," she murmured softly. "I hope there are dangers too. I have so much to atone for. But I fear you are mistaken. Chauvelin's eyes are fixed upon you all, he will scarce notice me. Quick, Sir Andrew, the coach is ready and there is not a moment to be lost. I must get to him. I must," she repeated with almost savage energy, "to warn him that that man is on his track. Can't you see that I must get to him, even if it be too late to save him, at least, to be by his side, at the last? Faith, madam, you must command me. Gladly would I or any of my comrades lay down our lives for your husband, if you will go yourself. Nay, friend, do you not see that I would go mad if I let you go without me?" She stretched out her hand to him. "You will trust me?" "I await your orders," he said simply. "Listen then. My coach is ready to take me to Dover. Do you follow me as swiftly as horses will take you. We meet at nightfall at the Fisherman's Rest. Chauvelin would avoid it as he is known there, and I think it would be the safest. I will gladly accept your escort to Calais. As you say, I might miss Sir Percy were you to direct me ever so carefully. We'll charter a schooner at Dover and cross over during the night. Disguised, if you will agree to it, as my lackey, you will, I think, escape detection. "I am entirely at your service, madam," rejoined the young man earnestly. "I trust to God that you will sight the Daydream before we reach Calais." With Chauvelin at his heels, every step the Scarlet Pimpernel takes on French soil is fraught with danger. "God grant it, Sir Andrew. But now farewell. We meet tonight at Dover. It will be a race between Chauvelin and me across the Channel tonight, and the prize, the life of the Scarlet Pimpernel." He kissed her hand and then escorted her to her chair. A quarter of an hour later she was back at the Crown Inn, where her coach and horses were ready and waiting for her. The next moment they thundered along the London streets, and then straight on to the Dover road at maddening speed. She had no time for despair now. She was up and doing and had no leisure to think. With Sir Andrew Ffoulkes as her companion and ally, hope had once again revived in her heart. God would be merciful. He would not allow so appalling a crime to be committed as the death of a brave man, through the hand of a woman who loved him and worshipped him, and who would gladly have died for his sake. Marguerite's thoughts flew back to him, the mysterious hero whom she had always unconsciously loved, when his identity was still unknown to her. Laughingly, in the olden days, she used to call him the shadowy king of her heart, and now she had suddenly found that this enigmatic personality whom she had worshipped, and the man who loved her so passionately, were one and the same. What wonder that one or two happier visions began to force their way before her mind. She vaguely wondered what she would say to him when first they would stand face to face. She had had so many anxieties, so much excitement during the past few hours, that she allowed herself the luxury of nursing these few more hopeful, brighter thoughts. Gradually the rumble of the coach wheels, with its incessant monotony, acted soothingly on her nerves. Her eyes, aching with fatigue and many shed and unshed tears, closed involuntarily, and she fell into a troubled sleep.